Good evening, everyone. I hope you're ready for a story unlike any other, one that takes us into the heart of war, the unknown, and a terrifying mystery that has haunted soldiers for generations. Tonight, we venture into the mountains of Afghanistan, a place where even the bravest warriors have failed, a place where history, horror, and legend collide. So sit back and listen closely, for what you're about to hear might just send a chill down your spine. November 10th, 1978. The bitter wind howled through the barren plains of Afghanistan, chilling even the seasoned soldiers of the Soviet 40th Army as they trudged through the desolate landscape. This was no ordinary land, a place untouched by time, a land where the mountains were more than just stone. They were legends, a graveyard for those who dared to conquer. Private Dmitry Ivanov, a soldier of the 108th Motorized Rifle Division, had heard stories, whispers from the men who had passed through these lands before him, tales of men who lost their minds, who disappeared into the wilderness, never to be seen again. The locals, too, spoke in hushed tones of the mountains and the cursed valley. But Dmitry dismissed these as superstition. After all, he was a soldier, a warrior trained to survive, to conquer. Nothing could break him. Still, as they neared the village, an unsettling feeling gnawed at Dmitry's gut. The air seemed different here, heavier, thicker. It pressed against his chest, and for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The silence was suffocating. The village, a small cluster of stone huts, was supposed to be a Taliban stronghold. Their mission was simple: search, secure, and neutralize. But as they entered the village, something felt off. There was no sign of life, no smoke rising from chimneys, no children playing in the dirt. Not even a stray dog barked, just the eerie stillness of a place abandoned. Dmitry scanned the surroundings. His breath, visible in the cold air, came out in sharp bursts, matching the thudding of his heart. He glanced at his commander, Captain Andrei Mikhailov, who was giving command orders, signaling for the men to move forward. They reached the center of the village, where an old stone well stood. And that's when they saw it. A pile of human bones. "Do you see this?" Dmitry whispered to his comrade Sergei, his voice barely audible. Sergei's face paled. This isn't right." Suddenly, the earth trembled. A roar unlike anything Dmitry had ever heard ripped through the mountains. It was primal, an ancient, terrible sound that seemed to echo from deep within the bowels of the earth. Dmitry froze. "Get ready," he shouted. "Weapons hot." Out of the shadows, a figure emerged from the mountainside, tall, towering, its body wrapped in crude animal skins. Its red hair swirled in the wind like flames, and its eyes, glowing with an unsettling intensity, locked onto them. It wielded a massive spear, adorned with jagged rocks, and charged at the soldiers with terrifying speed. Before Dmitry could even raise his rifle, the giant was upon them. In a single savage motion, it impaled Sergei, lifting him off the ground with a force that sent a chill down Dmitry's spine. Gunfire rang out. The soldiers, though trained for battle, were no match for the monstrous force that stood before them. The giant moved with an unnatural strength, dodging bullets as if they were nothing more than raindrops. Another swing of its spear, and another soldier fell. The battle was short, brutal, and one-sided. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the giant collapsed. Its massive body, towering over the soldiers, hit the ground with a deafening crash. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breaths of the surviving men. Dmitry stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. This could not be real. But the evidence was undeniable. The creature's body was grotesque, its hands monstrous, with 6 fingers each. Its mouth was filled with rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. Its eyes, though lifeless, seemed to burn with the fire of something ancient, something that should have remained buried in the myths. And as Dmitri stood there, staring at the fallen giant, the realization slowly began to sink in. They weren't alone. The mountains were watching them. The air was thick with the scent of blood. The men stood motionless, unable to look away from the fallen giant. Its body was an unnatural sight, a grotesque fusion of human and something else entirely. The creature's size alone would have made it a legend, but the evidence of its primal, barbaric nature, the raw power that had torn through their ranks, was something none of them could reconcile. Captain Mikhailov, the stern leader who had witnessed the horrors of countless battles, was the first to speak. "Gather the men. We need to get out of here now." Dmitri's fingers trembled as he wiped the cold sweat from his brow. His rifle felt heavier in his hands, as though the weight of their encounter was settling in his chest. His mind raced, but no matter how he tried to process it, the same question kept resurfacing. What was that thing? "Get the body," Mikhailov ordered, his voice cold. "We're taking it back." Taking the giant's corpse had not been a decision made lightly, but the situation left them with no choice. It was an unimaginable discovery, and the higher-ups would need to see through it, need to know that whatever the men had encountered was real. The helicopter arrived hours later, its large blades cutting through the air as it hovered above the village. The soldiers, still shaken by the brutal clash, carried the massive creature's body, wrapped in heavy tarp, to the transport. The stench was unbearable, a mix of rot, blood, and something much fouler. Dmitri had to swallow the bile rising in his throat as they secured the body to the helicopter. As the helicopter began its ascent, the men looked down at the village, still silent, still empty. The cold winds had swept through, leaving nothing but the lingering echoes of the battle and the heavy weight of what they had just seen. "Where are we going with this?" Dmitri asked, his voice hoarse from the shock. "Back to base," Mikhailov replied, his face set in stone. "We need answers." But as they flew further from the village, Dmitri could not shake the feeling that they were leaving something behind, something important. The mountains, once distant and cold, now felt alive, their jagged peaks looming in the distance like slant watchers. They weren't alone out here. Not anymore. Back at base, the creature's body was stored in a secure facility. The men were debriefed, but there were no cameras, no records. They were given strict orders to keep quiet about what had happened. Their silence was as cold and unyielding as the mountains they had just left behind. Days turned into weeks, and the soldiers returned to their regular duties. But Dmitri couldn't forget. Nightmares plagued him, of the giant's red hair and fiery eyes. He would wake, sweating, unable to shake the feeling that something was following him, something ancient, something dangerous. And then, one evening, while walking through the camp, Dmitri overheard a conversation between two officers. One of them was speaking urgently about a top-secret mission involving a creature. The word Kandahar echoed in his mind, and before he could approach, the conversation abruptly stopped. The name haunted him. Kandahar. He remembered the village, the bones, the giant. Was it possible that what they had encountered was just one of many? Or had they disturbed something far, far older, far darker than they could ever comprehend? The silence of the mountains was no longer just the absence of sound. It was the quiet before something terrible, something far beyond their understanding, was about to unfold. November 15th, 1978. The days since the extraction had blurred together in a haze of unease. Dmitri couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't right. The base, once bustling with the normal hum of military life, now felt oppressive. The air itself seemed thick with tension. The whispers started quietly at first, nothing more than rumors among the soldiers about what had been done with the giant's body. But Dmitri had learned long ago to trust his instincts. And his instincts told him something more than the usual battlefield gossip was at play. He couldn't shake the image of the creature, its massive body, grotesque and unnatural, lying on the transport. Every time he closed his eyes, its eyes seemed to burn through him, as if it were still alive, still watching. He wasn't the only one haunted by the memory. The other men who had witnessed the battle with the giant were no longer themselves. The once boisterous camaraderie had vanished. Now they were silent, distant, consumed by something Dmitri couldn't quite understand. One night, as Dmitri walked through the base on patrol, he overheard two officers speaking in hushed tones, their faces tense. "We're not equipped to deal with this," one officer muttered. "What if it's just the first of many? What are we supposed to do if there are more of them?" Dmitri stopped in his tracks, the weight of their words hitting him like a punch to the stomach. More of them. His thoughts raced. He had always heard stories of strange creatures in the mountains, things that didn't belong to this world, but he had never imagined they could be real. The officers fell silent when they noticed Dmitri standing nearby, but he had already heard enough. His heart pounded in his chest as he retreated to his quarters. The questions burned inside him. What was going on? Why were they keeping this a secret? Why had the higher-ups been so adamant about silencing them? The next day, Dmitri was called in again for another debriefing. This time, however, he was not alone. Several of the soldiers who had survived the encounter with the giant were seated around a table. Their faces were grim, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. "Dmitri," the senior officer said, his voice cold and formal, "you've seen what's happened. We can't let this get out. This isn't just a battlefield victory. This is something much more dangerous." Dmitri nodded, but his mind was racing. "What do you mean, sir? What is this thing? What is happening?" The officer leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't just about the giant. It's about what it represents. We believe this is a symptom of something much older, something buried beneath these mountains. And we don't know how far it goes. But we know one thing. It's not safe." Dmitri's breath caught in his throat. "Not safe. But we killed it." The officer shook his head. "Killing it won't end it. There are things in this world that aren't meant to be disturbed. The mountains hold ancient secrets, and the more we pry, the more we risk awakening something far worse." The room fell into a heavy silence. Dmitri's thoughts swirled. He had heard the rumors, the stories told in whispers about ancient creatures, about things hidden in the dark corners of the world. But to hear it from his commanding officer? To hear that they were possibly dealing with something far beyond their understanding. It was enough to make his stomach twist with fear. The officer stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "We've got our orders. Keep this quiet. You are to speak of it to no one, not even your families. Understood?" Dmitri nodded, though his mind was racing. There was no turning back now. The truth had been laid bare before him, but it was a truth that could never be shared. They were caught in something they couldn't escape. As he walked out of the room, a new fear settled over him. It wasn't just about the creatures in the mountains. It was about the thing that was being buried deep within the walls of the base. What were they really hiding? What else had they found? And more importantly, what else had they awakened November 20th, 1978? The days were growing colder, and the unease among the soldiers had reached a boiling point. Dmitri couldn't sleep. Every night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing with questions that had no answers. What had they really encountered? What was buried beneath those mountains, waiting to be uncovered? And why was it so important that they keep quiet about everything? As the days passed, it became harder and harder to ignore the feeling that they were being watched. Dmitri wasn't the only one who felt it followed. His comrades shared the same unease. A tension lingered in the air. thick and suffocating, like a storm waiting to break. One evening, while on his usual patrol, Dmitri found himself near the perimeter of the base, a place he rarely visited. The winds howled through the mountains, carrying with them the scent of something old, something unnatural. As he walked, he noticed something strange. A figure standing on a distant ridge, just beyond the reach of the camp's floodlights. Dmitri's heart skipped a beat. He was certain no one was supposed to be out there, especially not at this hour. He squinted into the darkness, but the figure was gone, fading into the shadows like a mirage. It was then that he heard a faint rustling behind him, the sound of footsteps on the cold earth. Dmitri spun around, rifle raised, but there was nothing. The air was still, too still. His breath came in ragged gasps as he scanned the area beneath, his instincts screaming that something was off. He turned quickly, heading back toward the camp, his mind racing. Could it have been one of the men? Or was it something else? Something, watching them from the darkness. The feeling of being watched never left Dmitri. It was like a shadow that followed him everywhere he went. And soon, it wasn't just him. Others reported seeing strange figures, two silent watchers in the distance, barely visible in the mountain's cold embrace. But when they tried to approach, the figures were always gone, as if they had never been there at all. Despite the growing fear, the soldiers remained tight-lipped. No one spoke about the strange occurrences they see. It was as if they all knew the truth, but no one dared to voice it. The higher-ups kept their distance, offering no explanations, only orders to continue with their duties and keep the strange occurrences to themselves. Then one morning a message arrived, urgent and brief. Operation Redstone, new orders, secure the area, further containment of the subject required. Dmitri didn't understand at first. Subject? What subject? It didn't take long before the soldiers realized what it meant. The giant they had killed, the body they had been ordered to transport, had been moved. And it wasn't just any body. It had been treated with the utmost secrecy, locked away in a facility deep inside the base, away from prying eyes. The new orders were clear. Containment. But no one was told what they were really containing, or why. Dmitri's mind raced as he processed the new information. Containment of subject required. That could mean anything, and it only added to the growing sense of dread that had taken root in every soldier's heart. As Dmitri made his way to the designated location, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The base had always been a place of military precision, but now it felt more like a prison. And the walls, the cold metal doors, seemed to press in on him with every step. The facility where the giant's body had been taken was sealed off, guarded by armed personnel. Dmitri, along with a small team of soldiers, was assigned to monitor the containment area. The hours stretched on, slow and agonizing, as they watched the building from a distance. But nothing happened. No strange noises, no signs of movement. And yet, Dmitri couldn't help but feel that the silence itself was a warning. That night, as Dmitri lay in his bunk, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. At first, he thought it was just another one of his restless nights. But then the footsteps grew louder, closer. His heart raced as he slowly got up, his hands trembling. He grabbed his rifle and moved cautiously to the door, his breath caught in his throat. He opened the door, but there was no one there. The corridor was empty, bathed in the pale light of the fluorescent bulbs. But as he stepped outside, a cold wind blew through the hallway, carrying with it the scent of death, stale, musty, and old. Dmitri's blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. Somewhere in the darkness, something was watching him, waiting. November 23, 1978. The days bled into one another, each as bleak and unsettling as the last. Dmitri could no longer tell if he was dreaming or awake. The lines between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition. The feeling of being watched had intensified, and every sound, every movement, set his nerves on edge. It was late at night when the first signs of something truly terrifying began to unfold. Dmitri had just finished his shift and was heading back to his quarters when he noticed a faint glow coming from the direction of the containment facility. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, maybe just the reflection from one of the searchlights. But as he drew closer, he realized something was wrong. The lights weren't positioned right. There was no reflection. It was coming from inside the building. His heart skipped a beat. The facility was supposed to be sealed off, locked tight. No one was allowed inside without clearance. But the eerie glow grew brighter, pulsing in time with the unsettling hum of the base's generators. Dmitri couldn't resist. He had to know what was going on. The air felt thick as he approached the building, his boots muffled by the silence that now hung over the compound. Every instinct told him to turn back, to walk away from whatever madness lay ahead. But he had already crossed the line, and now there was no turning back. He reached the door of the containment facility, and to his surprise found it ajar. A slight crack in the metal door was all that was needed for him to slip inside. He stepped into the darkened hallway, his breath shallow as he moved deeper into the building. The glow was brighter now, casting an eerie green light on the walls. It was coming from a room at the far end of the corridor. Dmitri's pulse quickened. With each step, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as though the very walls were closing in on him. He reached the door and slowly pushed it open. Inside, the room was bathed in the sickly glow of strange pulsating lights. But it wasn't the lights that froze Dmitri in his tracks. It was the sight before him. The giant's body, the thing they had killed, was gone. In its place stood something much worse. The remains of the giant were no longer lying still. Instead, they were changing. The body was no longer just a grotesque, lifeless mass. It was moving. The flesh was shifting, warping, as though it were being molded by unseen hands. Dmitri's eyes widened in disbelief as the giant's form began to stand, its limbs stretching unnaturally. The air in the room was thick with the stench of decay and something far older, something that had no place in this world. As the creature's eyes slowly opened, Dmitri realized that the thing they had killed was not merely dead. It had been awakened. And it wasn't alone. From the shadows, other figures began to emerge, more giants, their grotesque forms slowly coming into view. They had the same horrifying features: 6 fingers on each hand, multiple rows of teeth, and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intensity. Dmitri staggered back, his heart hammering in his chest. This couldn't be happening. These weren't just myths. They weren't just creatures from ancient stories. They were real. And they had been lying in wait for God knew how long. The giants moved slowly, almost purposefully, as though they had been waiting for this moment, the moment when they would rise again. Dmitri's mind raced. What had the officers been hiding? What had they unleashed when they decided to bring the body back to base? His breathing became shallow, and his fingers tightened around the rifle he had brought with him. He knew it was hopeless. There was no way they could fight these things. They were too powerful, too ancient. A noise behind him made Dmitri spin around. The door to the facility was closing, and standing in the doorway was a figure, Captain Mikhailov. Dmitri. Mikhailov's voice was cold, his eyes empty. I knew you would come here. Why? Dmitri choked out, his voice shaking. What are they? What have you done? The captain stepped forward, his face emotionless. We didn't know what we were dealing with. The creature's body, it wasn't just a relic. It was a key. These beings, these giants, are part of something much larger than we could ever have imagined. Something ancient. We've been studying them, trying to understand how they fit into the world. Dimitri's mind reeled. Studying them? He had always suspected something was wrong. But this was madness. The containment was never meant to stop them, Mikhailov continued, his voice now a low whisper. It was only meant to delay the inevitable. The creatures, now fully awake, seemed to sense their presence. They began to move toward Dmitri, their massive forms blocking the door. Mikhailov looked at Dmitri one last time, his eyes cold and distant. You should have stayed away, Dmitri. Now it's too late. With that, the door slammed shut behind him, leaving Dmitri alone in the dark with the giants. The mountain had risen, and with it, the horrors that had been buried for centuries. November 24th, 1978. The cold had settled in deep, like a suffocating blanket, and the air inside the facility was thick with the stench of decay and fear. Dmitri's heart pounded in his chest as he backed away from the giants, his mind struggling to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before him. The creatures, now fully animated, moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their massive forms blocking every exit. Dmitri's breath came in shallow gasps, his fingers trembling around his rifle. He knew it was useless. They were too powerful, too ancient. There was no way they could be stopped by mere bullets. But he couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by fear. He had to find a way out. He had to warn the others. Dmitri darted toward the far corner of the room, trying to make himself as small as possible. The giant's glowing eyes followed his every movement, and the air seemed to hum with the unnatural energy they exuded. Their sykes fingers twitched, their grotesque hands flexing as if testing the air, preparing for something. From behind, the faint sound of metal scraping on concrete reached Dmitri's ears. He turned to find Captain Mikhailov standing near the entrance, his face as cold and emotionless as ever. The door was sealed shut. They were trapped. They're waking up, Dmitri, Mikhailov said, his voice a harsh whisper. This is only the beginning. You're not meant to stop them. You're meant to help them. All of you are. Dmitri's pulse quickened, his eyes darting between the captain and the looming giants. Help them? What do you mean? He couldn't understand. Had Mikhailov lost his mind? Had they all been part of some sick experiment? Mikhailov didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, allowing Dmitri a clear view of the creatures that now moved with a purposeful intent. They were no longer just mindless horrors. They were organized, their actions synchronized, as though they had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The ground shook beneath Dmitri's feet as one of the giants took a step forward. It seemed to tower over him, its red hair flowing like a flame in the dim light, its eyes fixed on him with an ancient malice. Its spear, now nothing more than a jagged piece of rock, glinted with an eerie glow. Dmitri's mind raced, his thoughts spinning in every direction. What had Mikhailov done? What had they awakened? The ancient beings, these giants, were not just relics from a forgotten time. They were part of something far more sinister. Suddenly, one of the giants lifted its hand, and with terrifying precision, it pointed toward Dmitri. The air crackled with energy, and a low, guttural growl escaped the giant's throat. Run, Mikhailov whispered, his voice cold and emotionless. There's no stopping them now. But it was too late. The ground beneath Dmitri's feet began to tremble, and the room was filled with a deafening roar. The giant's eyes glowed brighter, their bodies shifting as though they were awakening from a long slumber. Dmitri felt the weight of their presence press down on him, suffocating him. He had to get out. With every ounce of strength he had left, Dmitri turned and bolted for the door. His heart raced, his mind clouded by panic. The giant's growls grew louder, their footsteps shaking the earth beneath him. He could feel their gaze on his back, the weight of their hunger and ancient rage bearing down on him. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. If he did, it would be over. He reached the door, slamming his shoulder into it, but it didn't budge. The metal was thick, reinforced to withstand any force. Dimitri's breath caught in his throat as he turned around, looking for another way out. The giants were closing in, their movements slow but steady. And then, just as hope began to slip away, the door opened. Not by his hand, but by some unseen force, as though the building itself had decided to release him. Dimitri didn't look back. He ran. He ran as fast as his legs would carry him, the sounds of the giant's footsteps pounding behind him, growing louder with each passing second. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know if anyone was left alive. But he knew one thing for sure. The mountain was no longer just a place of stone and earth. It was alive, and with it, the giants had returned. November 25th, 1978. Dimitri ran through the dark corridors of the base, his breath ragged, his legs burning with exhaustion. The sound of the giants' footsteps echoed in his mind, each thunderous step bringing them closer. The walls of the base seemed to close in on him, their cold metal surfaces reflecting only the faint glow of emergency lights. He couldn't think straight. The fear, the adrenaline, everything had clouded his mind. All he knew was that he had to get out. He had to survive. He didn't dare to look back, but he could feel the presence of the giants looming behind him, their massive forms closing the distance. They were slow, deliberate, but they didn't need to rush. Dimitri was no match for their cc, their strength. They were ancient, and they had waited centuries for this moment. He was just a mere obstacle in their path. Dimitri rounded a corner, nearly tripping over his own feet, but he kept moving. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know if there was anywhere to run. The base was Vestes, its maze-like corridors stretching out in every direction. But Dimitri had lost track of where he was. All he could focus on was the pounding of his heart, the sound of his own breath filling his ears. He reached an intersection and skidded to a stop. His mind was frantic, searching for a way out. But as his eyes darted from one direction to the next, he realized something chilling. There were no exits, no windows, no doors. "They've sealed us in," Dimitri thought, his stomach sinking. "They never meant for us to leave." Suddenly, the air shifted. The temperature dropped, the hairs on the back of Dimitri's neck standing on end. He could feel it, deep in his bones, the weight of something dark, something ancient. He didn't need to turn around to know that the giants were there. He could hear them, their footsteps growing louder, more distinct. Their presence was undeniable. Without thinking, Dimitri bolted again, his feet pounding against the floor. He didn't care about the direction anymore. He just needed to run. His body was screaming for rest, but there was no time. He could feel the pulse of fear in his veins, driving him forward. He turned a corner and collided with someone. The force knocked him off balance, and for a split second, he thought the giants had caught up to him. But then he looked up, and his heart skipped a beat. It was Mikhailov. The captain was standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. He looked almost human again. The cold, emotionless facade he had worn earlier had cracked, revealing the man beneath. "Dimitri, you don't understand," Mikhailov said, his voice shaking. "It's already too late. We've awoken something that we can't stop. Something far more powerful than we can even imagine." Dimitri stood frozen, his chest heaving. The fear that had gripped him seemed to tighten in his chest, threatening to choke him. He had so many questions, but there was no time for answers. "What happened, Captain?" Dimitri asked, his voice hoarse. "What are they? What is going on here?" Mikhailov took a deep breath, his eyes flickering to the end of the hallway. The giants were getting closer, their steps now shaking the very foundation of the base. They're not just giants, Dmitri, Mikhailov said quietly. They're guardians, protectors of something much older. The body we brought back wasn't just a corpse. It was a key to something buried deep beneath the earth. And now they've come to reclaim it. Dmitri's mind was spinning. A key? To what? What could be more dangerous than the creatures themselves? There's no way out, Mikhailov said, his voice breaking. We're all dead. We opened a door that should have stayed closed. The ground trembled again, and Dmitri felt the familiar dread settle over him, like a dark cloud. The giants were getting closer. He could hear their deep, guttural growls, feel their eyes on him, even though he couldn't see them yet. Mikhailov stepped forward, his face grim. Run, Dmitri, he said, his voice low. You need to escape. If you can, I'll slow them down. But you have to get out of here. Warn the others. Don't let them wake everything. Dmitri hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't want to leave Mikhailov behind, but there was no time. He had to go. If he stayed, they would both die. Good luck, Mikhailov whispered. Dmitri didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He turned and ran, sprinting down the hallway, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. Behind him, he could hear the deep, resonating growl of the giants and the sound of Mikhailov's last stand. Dmitri had no idea what was waiting for him at the end of this nightmare. All he knew was that the mountain had awakened, and with it, the horrors buried deep within. November 26th, 1978. Dmitri's breath echoed in the empty corridors as he waited, his heart pounding in his chest. His legs were on fire, every muscle screaming in protest, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Behind him, the sound of the giant's footsteps reverberated through the base, each thundering step closer than the last. He didn't know how long he had been running, how far he had gone. The walls of the base were a blur as he raced past them, desperation driving him forward. His mind was a maelstrom of fear, confusion, and anger. What had they unleashed? What was happening? He stumbled to a halt in front of a large metal door, one that led to the deepest, most secure part of the base. This was where the highest security operations were housed. And as Dmitri looked at the door, a single thought crossed his mind. This is the only way out. He pressed his hand to the door, feeling the cold metal beneath his palm. It was locked, of course. Every door here had been designed to withstand any threat. But Dmitri didn't care. He wasn't going to die in this labyrinth. Not like this. He took a step back, surveying his surroundings. The giant's growls echoed in the distance, and he knew they weren't far. But it wasn't just the giants that scared him now. It was what they had awakened, what had been buried deep beneath the earth for so long. Suddenly, Dmitri heard a voice behind him, sharp and commanding. Dmitri, stop! He spun around, his rifle raised instinctively. But it wasn't one of the giants. It was Mikhailov. His face was drawn, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. But he was still alive. What are you doing here? Dmitri demanded, his voice hoarse. We need to get out, Mikhailov. The base is falling apart. Mikhailov stepped forward slowly, his expression unreadable. There's nowhere to run, Dmitri. Not anymore. The mountain has awakened, and with it, something far worse than we could have ever imagined. Dmitri shook his head, refusing to believe it. What are you talking about? What are they? Mikhailov's face twisted in pain as he spoke. They're guardians, protectors of something ancient. These giants, they have been lying dormant beneath the earth for centuries. But we disturbed something when we brought the body back to base. Something that's been waiting to rise. Dmitri's heart pounded. Waiting to rise? What do you mean? What is it? Mikhailov looked away, his gaze distant. It's not just about the giants. It's about what's below. The body we brought back was just the first step, the key. And now, we've unleashed it. The words hit Dmitri like a punch to the gut. The key? What had Mikhailov done? Is it already too late? Dmitri asked, his voice trembling. Mikhailov nodded slowly. The giants aren't the only threat, Dmitri. There's something far worse buried beneath the earth. And it's waking up as we speak. Dmitri didn't know what to say. His mind was a blur of questions, each one more terrifying than the last. What was beneath the earth? What had they awakened? And why had they been so determined to keep it a secret? Where do we go? Dmitri asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mikhailov's eyes were filled with regret as he looked back at the metal door. There's only one place left to go. The vault. It's the only place we can contain it now. But we have to get there before it's too late. Without another word, Mikhailov turned and began walking toward the door. Dmitri followed, though his steps were heavy with dread. They were running out of time, and the giants weren't the only danger. Whatever was buried beneath the earth, whatever had been awakened, was far more terrifying than anything they had faced so far. The door to the vault was heavily reinforced, its lock designed to withstand any attempt at unauthorized entry. But Mikhailov knew the code. He punched it in with practiced ease, the door sliding open with a low grinding noise. Inside was a massive chamber, far larger than Dmitri had expected. The walls were lined with steel shelves, each one filled with rows upon rows of sealed containers. Some were labeled with ominous red markings, others with strange symbols that Dmitri couldn't decipher. What is all this? Dmitri asked, his voice shaking. Containment, Mikhailov said simply. We've been studying these creatures for years. They're not just giants. They're part of something older, something more powerful than we can even begin to understand. Dmitri's gaze fell on one of the sealed containers. It was larger than the others, its surface etched with strange cryptic symbols. His eyes widened as he realized what it was. That's it, isn't it? Dmitri whispered. That's the thing you've been keeping locked up. Mikhailov didn't answer. He didn't have to. The container was the answer. It was already beginning to stir. November 27th, 1978. The air in the vault was thick with tension. Every breath Dmitri took feeling heavier than the last. His eyes were locked on the massive container in front of him, the strange symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. His heart hammered in his chest as he stepped closer, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But his legs refused to obey. The air seemed to vibrate with an energy that Dmitri couldn't explain. But deep down, he knew one thing for certain. What was inside that container was something far worse than the giants. The giants had been terrifying, yes, but this was ancient. Mikhailov moved to the control panel beside the container, his fingers dancing over the keys with a practiced precision. Dmitri couldn't tear his eyes away from the sealed unit. Whatever was inside, whatever had been hidden away for centuries, was now beginning to stir. He could feel it in his bones, the unmistakable presence of something alive, something that had been waiting for this moment. The low hum in the room grew louder, the vibrations intensifying. Dmitri's breath quickened, his heart racing. He didn't want to know what would happen when that container opened, but the thought of what was beyond those walls pushed him forward. Mikhailov glanced at him one last time before pressing the final key. The metal seals on the container clicked open, and a rush of cold air swept through the room, carrying with it an overwhelming stench of decay, like something that had been buried too long. The container's door creaked open slowly, revealing the dark, shifting form inside. Dmitri's blood ran cold. The thing inside was enormous, far larger than the giants they had faced. Its body was twisted and malformed, its skin a mottled gray, covered in ancient runes and scars that looked as though they had been etched by weights not of this world. But it wasn't the appearance that froze Dmitri in his tracks. It was the power radiating from the creature. It was a presence, an ancient force that made the air itself feel alive. Mikhailov stepped back, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "It's awake," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The last of the guardians, the true protector of this mountain." Dmitri's mind spun as he tried to process the sight in front of him. This was the true threat. He had thought the giants were the end of it, that once they were destroyed, the nightmare would be over. But this thing, it was something else entirely. The creature's eyes opened. Dmitri's breath caught in his throat. They weren't eyes like any man's. They were black, endless pits of darkness, like the void itself staring back at him. The creature's gaze seemed to weigh him, its stare probing, like it could see into the deepest parts of his soul. Then it moved, slowly at first, its massive clawed hands flexing as it pushed itself up from the confines of the container. The floor beneath it groaned under its weight, and Dmitri could feel the room shaking with the force of its movements. "What is it?" Dmitri whispered, unable to tear his eyes away. "It's what was never meant to wake," Mikhailov said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. "This is it, Dmitri. This is the thing we've been trying to contain. The guardian of the mountain. The god that once ruled over these lands." Dmitri stepped back, his mind racing with sting. This creature, this thing, was no mere monster. It was something far older, something that had existed long before humanity had even risen to power. And now, it was free. The ground shook as the creature finally stood upright, its form towering over Dmitri and Mikhailov. It wasn't just physically massive. There was a presence to it, an aura of pure malevolent power that seemed to press down on the room like an unrelenting weight. Dmitri could hear the creature's voice inside his mind, a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through his skull. "You have awakened me, little man, but you are too weak to stop me. Now, you will witness what was buried beneath the earth." The creature's massive hand reached out toward Mikhailov, and in a flash, the captain was lifted from the ground, his body crushed under the weight of the creature's grip. Dmitri could only watch in horror as Mikhailov's body twisted, his bones snapping like brittle twigs. It was too much. Dmitri's body reacted before his mind could comprehend the danger. He spun and ran, his legs carrying him with all the speed he could muster, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, he heard the creature's roar, the sound vibrating through the very walls of the vault. It wasn't just a roar. It was a command, a call to something else. And Dmitri realized, with a cold, sickening certainty, that the creature wasn't alone. As he sprinted through the halls of the base, the sound of heavy footsteps followed. The giants were coming, and they were bringing an army. November 28th, 1978. The base was falling apart. Dmitri's legs burned as he ran through the dark corridors, the sounds of heavy footsteps and deep, guttural growls reverberating off the walls. The ground shook beneath him with each passing moment, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. Behind him, the massive creature that had been awakened, its enormous form, towering over everything in its path, was following, its presence overwhelming the very structure of the base. He could hear the giants now, too, their heavy, deliberate footsteps growing closer, shaking the ground as they moved through the hallways. It wasn't just one giant anymore. There were many of them, and they were moving with purpose, their monstrous forms filling the base like a flood of destruction. Dmitri's breath came in skesifs as he sprinted through the maze of tunnels, each turn feeling more like a trap than a way out. He had to get to the surface. He had to get out of this nightmare. But the deeper he ran, the more he felt like the walls were closing in on him, trapping him in the very heart of the monster's domain. He reached another intersection, panting heavily, his eyes darting from one hallway to the next. The sound of the giant's growls grew louder, and Dmitri knew they were closing in. He had no time to think, no time to make a plan. He had to move. A low hum, almost like a vibration, filled the air, and Dmitri froze in place. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the hum grew louder, more intense. It was coming from deep within the base, from the very core of the mountain. Something was happening. Something was awakening. He turned and ran again, driven by pure instinct now. The air around him felt thick and oppressive, as if the very mountain itself was coming alive. The walls seemed to close in on him, the darkness becoming more suffocating with each passing second. And then, ahead, Dmitri saw the light. The exit. He pushed himself harder, his body screaming for rest. But he couldn't stop. Not now. He had to make it out. The surface was close. He could feel it. As he reached the door, he slammed his shoulder against it, pushing it open with all his strength. He stumbled out into the night air, the cold wind hitting his face like a slap. For a moment, he felt a flicker of relief. But that relief was short-lived. Behind him, the sound of the giant's footsteps had stopped. The ground had stopped shaking. The base had fallen silent. And then, with a bone-chilling roar, the creature, the guardian, emerged from the depths of the mountain. Dmitri turned around just in time to see the massive figure of the creature emerge from the shadows, its eyes glowing with ancient rage. Its enormous form towered over the land, its muscles rippling under its twisted gray skin. Its claws scraped against the ground, leaving deep gouges in the earth as it moved forward. Dmitri's heart raced as he backed away, his legs refusing to carry him any further. The creature was no longer just a legend. It was real, and it was free. From behind him, the sound of the other giants echoed in the night. They were coming, emerging from the darkness like a horde of nightmares, their massive bodies moving in sync with their leader. Dmitri turned and ran again, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. His mind was spinning, his thoughts a blur of panic and disbelief. There was no escaping this. There was nowhere to hide. The ground shook once more as the giants moved across the land, their eyes fixed on Dmitri, their growls filling the air. He could hear their footsteps drawing closer, feel the weight of their presence bearing down on him like an avalanche. He had no plan, no hope left. But in the distance, he could see something, a flicker of light, a movement. It was a figure, a man. Dmitri's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the silhouette. It was another soldier, someone from the base, someone who had survived. Dmitri pushed himself harder, stumbling toward the figure, desperate for help, for a way out. But as he reached the soldier, he saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was resignation. "Get back!" the soldier shouted, his voice filled with panic. "You don't understand. We're already too late." Before Dmitri could react, the ground beneath their feet cracked open, and the first of the giants stepped forward, its massive foot slamming down between them, sending them both flying. The mountain had woken up, and with it, the floodgates had opened. November 29th, 1978. The world had turned into a nightmare. Dmitri's chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath. His body ached, his mind clouded by fear and exhaustion. But he couldn't stop. The giant's foot had nearly crushed him, but luck had been on his side for the moment. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting to the soldier who had warned him. But the man was gone, swallowed up by the darkness, as the giant's enormous forms continued to pour out of the mountain. The earth trembled beneath him again. The giants, their massive bodies towering over everything, were on the move. Their growls echoed across the land, the sound reverberating through Dmitri's very bones. There was no escape. He stumbled forward, pushing through the chaos of fallen debris and the wreckage of the base. His mind was numb. The mountainside, once a familiar and safe place, had turned into an unforgiving hell. The giants were everywhere. Their enormous shapes loomed in the distance, each one more terrifying than the last. Dmitri knew that survival was now a fleeting hope, but his survival instinct was still alive. He had to find a way to fight back. He had to do something. His gaze shifted to the remnants of the base. It had been a military stronghold, once filled with soldiers, equipment, and defense. Now it was a graveyard. A few scattered survivors were making desperate attempts to flee, but they were no match for the giants. Dmitri's heart sank as he realized there was nothing left. There was no way to escape this place. The giants had come, and they weren't going anywhere. They had risen, and now they would lay waste to everything in their path. But there was one lost hope: the vault. Dmitri's mind flashed back to the cryptic conversation with Mikhailov. The captain's words about the creature being the guardian of something far older, something buried deep beneath the mountain. The vault, he had said, was the key to containing the horrors within the earth. It was the only place left to fight back. He had no choice. Dmitri pushed forward, moving toward the vault. It was located at the farthest reaches of the base, near the entrance to the underground tunnels. He had to reach it. He had to stop the giants, stop whatever had been awakened, or else everything was lost. The vault's entrance was fortified, locked down with layers of steel and concrete. But Dmitri knew it had to be opened. The codes, the systems, they were still accessible. He reached the control panel, his fingers fumbling with the keys, the sound of the giant's footsteps growing louder in the distance. His heart raced, the pressure mounting. He couldn't fail now. If the vault remained sealed, the giants would break through. They would destroy everything in their path. He slammed his hand against the panel, and the door slowly began to open, a low hiss echoing in the silent night. As the massive metal doors creaked apart, Dmitri could hear something inside, something stirring. He stepped back, instinctively pulling his rifle from his back. His eyes scanned the darkness within the vault, waiting for the inevitable. And then, from the shadows, a faint glow appeared. It was barely noticeable at first, a soft, eerie light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And then, the creature emerged. It was massive, its form a blur of darkness and shadow. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its body was covered in ancient markings, runic symbols, that seemed to pulse with an energy Dmitri could feel even from where he stood. It wasn't like the giants. It was something older, something more powerful. Dmitri knew, without a doubt, that this was the true guardian, the one Mikhailov had spoken of, the one they had unleashed. The creature's gaze fixed on Dmitri, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. He could feel the weight of its stare, the ancient power emanating from its being. It wasn't just a creature. It was a force of nature, something far beyond anything Dmitri could comprehend. And then, it moved. Dmitri fired his rifle, but the bullets did nothing. The creature advanced slowly, its massive clawed feet shaking the ground with each step. It didn't need to move fast. It moved with purpose. It moved with the intent to destroy. Dmitri's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to stop it. There had to be something, some way to fight back. But as the creature neared, he realized the truth. There was no fighting it. Not now. Not when the mountain itself had come alive. His body froze as the creature reached him. It towered over him, its breath cold and foul. Its glowing eyes locked on his with an intensity that left him paralyzed with fear. The ground beneath them rumbled again, and Dmitri realized the giants were closing in. They weren't just here to destroy the base. They were here to free the guardian. And now that it was awake, nothing could stop them. As the creature reached out for him, Dmitri's thoughts flashed back to everything that had led him here. The soldiers, the nightmares, the relentless march of time. And then, with a single powerful motion, the creature's massive hand slammed down onto Dmitri. The world went black. November 30th, 1978. The darkness was absolute. Dmitri's body felt like lead, his limbs numb as though he had been submerged in freezing water. His mind was a blur of chaos, flickering images of the creature, its eyes glowing like burning coals, its massive hand crushing everything in its path. But the pain didn't come. It was as if time itself had stopped, holding him in this strange, endless moment. For a second, Dmitri thought he was dead. Maybe he was. Maybe this was the end of everything. But then, his eyes fluttered open. The world around him was spinning, a disorienting blur of shadows and light. His body felt weightless, as though he were floating in the void. The roar of the giants and the creature had free-faded, leaving only an eerie silence. His heart hammered in his chest as he tried to move, but his muscles refused to obey. He was in a place beyond the mountain now, a place that was different. He tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, the world around him seemed to speak in whispers, in groans, in voices he couldn't understand. The shadows stretched out before him, growing darker, deeper. He felt himself drawn toward them, as if something was pulling him in, urging him to follow. And then, a flash of light, a crack of blinding illumination, ripped through the blackness. Dmitri's eyes snapped open as the light flooded the space around him. He was back in the vault. But the creatures, the giants, the horror, it was all gone. For a moment, he thought he was safe. But the silence was deafening. It felt wrong. The vault had collapsed. The base, what was left of it, was gone, reduced to rubble. The creatures, the giants, everything had disappeared. All that was left was a barren wasteland, the remnants of the terror that had swallowed the mountain. Dmitri could feel the weight of the silence, the absence of the nightmares that had once haunted him. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, the ground beneath him began to tremble once more. Dmitri's blood ran cold as he felt the rumble spread beneath his feet, shaking the very foundation of the earth. The giants were not gone. The guardian had not been stopped. It was only a matter of time. Dmitri pushed himself to his feet, his body still sluggish and weak, but his mind was sharp. He had survived, but at what cost? The base had fallen. The world was in chaos, and the creatures, those ancient beings, had awakened. The guardian was free, and with it came the end. But Dmitri couldn't stop now. The future, what was left of it, was in his hands. If he could make it out of this, if he could find others, if he could warn the world, then maybe there was a chance. But it wouldn't be easy. There was nowhere safe anymore. The giants weren't the only threat. The true horror had been awakened, and it was still out there, waiting. Dmitri stumbled through the wreckage, his steps unsteady, but he kept moving. The darkness was closing in again, but this time, he wasn't alone. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was Mikhailov. Dmitri, the captain's voice was hoarse, filled with pain. It's not over. It will never be over. The mountain has claimed us all. Dmitri looked at Mikhailov, his heart sinking. The man had been through hell. They had both been through hell. But now there was no escaping it. The giants were not just protectors, they were the harbingers of the end. Dmitri reached out, gripping Mikhailov's arm. "What do we do now?" he whispered, the weight of the question sinking in. "We fight," Mikhailov replied, his eyes hollow with the understanding of what had been unleashed. "But even if we fight, there is no hope. The guardians are awake, and they are calling to others." As Mikhailov spoke, the ground trembled again, and the air filled with the low growl of the giants. Dmitri looked up, knowing that there was no way out. The world was crumbling, and there was nothing left to do but face the nightmare that had been unleashed. The last battle had begun. December 1st, 1978. The earth had stopped shaking, but the devastation was far from over. Dmitri and Mikhailov stood in the ruins of the base, surrounded by the wreckage. The giants were moving across the land now, their monstrous forms towering over the landscape. They were no longer just creatures of myth, but harbingers of destruction, bringing death wherever they went. And the guardians, the ancient beings that had been unleashed from the mountain's depths, were leading the charge. Mikhailov's face was grim as he surveyed the horizon. The once proud base was nothing more than a crater now, swallowed by the earth, reduced to dust and ash. The rest of the survivors, what little remained, were scattered, hiding in whatever shelter they could find. They had fought against the giants, but they had lost. The mountain had risen, and the world had trembled. "It's over," Mikhailov said, his voice hollow, filled with the weight of defeat. "There's no stopping them now." Dmitri shook his head. He refused to believe that. He had survived this long. He couldn't just give up. He couldn't let the world fall to these monsters. "We can still fight," Dmitri said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. "There's always a way. We can't just surrender." Mikhailov turned to him, his eyes dark with a knowledge that Dmitri couldn't yet understand. "You don't get it, Dmitri. This is bigger than us. The giants are not just creatures. They are part of something much older, something that we have no hope of defeating. They are the protectors of something buried beneath the earth, something that is waking up." Dmitri took a step back, his mind racing. He had heard Mikhailov's words before, but this time they felt different. Something buried beneath the earth. What was it? And what did it mean for the world? "They've been waiting for this moment," Mikhailov continued, his voice low. "The guardians, the giants, they've been asleep for centuries, waiting for the world to weaken enough so they could rise again. We've awoken them, Dmitri. There's no going back." Dmitri looked at the mountains in the distance, their dark peaks looming like silent sentinels. They had always been a place of mystery, a place where ancient things were buried. But now those things had risen. The wind howled through the wreckage, carrying with it the faint sound of distant roars. The giants were moving closer, their footsteps shaking the ground beneath Dmitri's feet. The survivors had retreated as far as they could, but there was nowhere to run. The giants were everywhere, and the creatures were not evenly. The guardians, whatever they were with them. "They won't stop," Dmitri said, his voice barely a whisper. "They will destroy everything." Mikhailov didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, his face hard as stone. The weight of what was happening was too much for him to bear, but Dmitri could see the fire still burning in his eyes. Mikhailov might have given up on hope, but Dmitri hadn't. He couldn't. Not yet. "We need to fight back," Dmitri said again, his voice firm this time. "There has to be something we can do." Mikhailov's gaze turned toward him, his face a mixture of sadness and resolve. "There's one thing we can do," he said slowly. "There's a place deep, beneath the base, where we can end it. It's a last resort. But if we're going to stop this, it's the only way." Dmitri's heart skipped a beat. "What place? What are you talking about?" Mikhailov looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and finality. "The vault. There's a way to seal them again, Dmitri. But it won't be easy. And it won't come without a cost." The words hit Dmitri like a punch. The vault. He had seen it, the containment facility where they had kept the creatures locked away. But what did Mikhailov mean by sealing them again? How could they possibly stop what had already been set into motion? "We have to try," Dmitri said. his voice barely audible. "We can't just let them destroy everything." Mikhailov nodded slowly. "We may not have a choice, but if we don't try, the world will fall. The giants will rise, and there will be nothing left. No one will survive. Not even us." Dmitri swallowed hard. The weight of the decision hung heavily on his shoulders, but he knew what had to be done. If there was any chance of stopping this nightmare, they had to take it. "We need to get to the vault," Dmitri said, his voice filled with determination. "Now." Mikhailov looked at him, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Then let's go. It's the last chance we have." Together, they turned and moved toward the remnants of the base, the giant's roars growing louder in the distance. The world was on the brink of destruction, but Dmitri refused to give in. They still had a chance, however slim it might be, and they were going to take it. December 2nd, 1978. The vault doors were closing behind them, the heavy sound of metal grinding against metal, reverberating through the dark hallways. Dmitri and Mikhailov had made it to the heart of the base, where the last remnants of hope now lay. The vault, the place Mikhailov had spoken of, was their final chance to stop the giants, to stop the guardians from bringing about the end of the world. But as the door sealed shut behind them, Dmitri felt a binking sensation in his gut. The room was small and dimly lit, filled with equipment and old data files. The air smelled stale, like something long forgotten. Dmitri's eyes scanned the room, the heavy silence pressing down on him. But there was something else here, something waiting. Mikhailov stood by a terminal at the far end of the room, his fingers flying across the keys. His face was etched with exhaustion, but there was a grim determination in his eyes. He knew what was at stake. "We don't have much time," Mikhailov said without looking up. "The giants are moving in, and if they reach this vault before we can activate the fail-safe, it's over. We'll never have another chance to stop them." Dmitri nodded, his pulse racing. He didn't know what the fail-safe was, didn't even know if it would work, but it was their only option. The giants were coming. The ground beneath them was still shaking with each of their massive steps, the rumbling a constant reminder of the destruction that awaited them. Mikhailov's fingers paused on the terminal. He turned to face Dmitri, his expression unreadable. "This is the point of no return," Mikhailov said softly. "Once we activate the failsafe, there's no going back. The mountain will close. Everything we've done will be sealed away. The guardians, the giants, they will be locked in here, and nothing can ever bring them out." Dmitri's breath hitched. The weight of Mikhailov's words hit him like a punch to the chest. Once they sealed it, it would be over. Forever. "And what happens to us?" Dmitri asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mikhailov's gaze shifted, his eyes haunted. "We're not leaving here. Not alive, anyway." The air in the room grew heavier, thick with the weight of their decision. Dmitri's heart thundered in his chest. They had made it this far, fought through hell itself, and now they were faced with the final choice. The giants were coming. If they didn't act, everything they had fought for would be lost. He could feel the ground trembling again. The giants were close. "Do it," Dmitri said, his voice firm. "We can't wait any longer. Activate the fail-safe." Mikhailov nodded, his face hardening with resolve. He turned back to the terminal and pressed a series of buttons. The screen flickered, then went dark, before a series of cryptic words appeared on the display. "Failsafe sequence initiated," the screen read. Dmitri's heart skipped a beat as the walls around them began to rumble. He could hear the giants now, their roars shaking the very foundation of the base. It was too late to turn back. They had made their choice. And then, with a loud mechanical groan, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the air filled with the sound of steel moving, grinding against steel. The mountain was closing. "No!" Mikhailov shouted, his voice filled with panic. Something's wrong. The terminal flickered again, the lights dimming. Dmitri's stomach dropped as the rumbling intensified. It wasn't just the failsafe that was engaging. There was something else. Something that shouldn't have been activated. The door to the vault began to shut, but instead of sealing it away, the ground beneath them split open, and a blinding light poured in from the cracks. A deep guttural roar filled the chamber, the sound of something ancient and powerful awakening from its slumber. Dmitri turned to Mikhailov, his eyes wide with terror. What's happening? What did we do? Mikhailov's face was pale, his hand shaking as he stared at the terminal. We didn't just activate the failsafe. We triggered something else. Dmitri's eyes widened as he looked at the fissures opening in the ground, the cracks revealing something else. Something worse than the giants. A presence unlike anything he had ever felt before. A power that radiated through the very air. The guardians weren't just beings to protect the mountain. They were the keepers of something far worse, something older. And now, it was free. The light grew brighter, the ground beneath them shaking uncontrollably. Dmitri knew that there was no running from this. The giants had been just the beginning. The true terror of the mountain, the thing they had unleashed, was waking up. And now, they were going to have to face it. But there was no time to think. The walls were closing in, the base shaking like it was about to collapse. The giants had arrived, and the end had come. December 2nd, 1978. The ground trembled as the mountain began to open. Dmitri could feel the vibrations coursing through his body, the weight of the ancient power that was awakening deep beneath them. The light from the fissures in the ground grew brighter, filling the chamber with an overwhelming intensity that made Dmitri's vision blur. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding around him. This can't be happening, Mikhailov muttered, his voice strained with fear. His fingers hovered over the terminal, desperately trying to deactivate the failsafe, but it was too late. The base was coming apart at the seams. The ground split wide open, revealing an endless chasm beneath them. The darkness beyond it pulsating with a force Dmitri couldn't even begin to comprehend. What did we awaken? Dmitri whispered, his voice trembling. Mikhailov turned to face him, his face pale, his eyes haunted. Something older. Something powerful. We were never meant to wake it, Dmitri. This isn't just the guardians. This is the true source of their power. Dmitri's mind raced as he tried to process what Mikhailov was saying. The true source? What could be worse than the giants? What was buried beneath the earth that could cause this much destruction? The roar of the giants grew louder, reverberating through the walls of the collapsing base. The ground continued to quake, the sound of stone cracking and metal bending echoing through the vault. The guardians, the giants, had emerged from their prison, but they weren't the true threat. The true terror was awakening right before Dmitri's eyes. The light from the chasm grew blinding, and Dmitri stumbled backward, shielding his eyes. The heat from the fissures was unbearable, and he could feel the air growing thick, heavy with the power of something ancient. He knew they had made a grave mistake. There was no going back now. "Get out of here, Dmitri," Mikhailov shouted, his voice barely audible over the deafening noise. "There's no time. You have to leave, now." Dmitri looked at Mikhailov, confusion and panic flooding his mind. "What? What do you mean, leave? We can't. We've unleashed it," Mikhailov screamed, his eyes wide with terror. "It's too powerful. The mountain, it was never meant to be disturbed. We were supposed to contain it, not set it free. We're too late, Dmitri, run." The ground beneath them split again, wider this time, and Dmitri felt himself being pulled toward the chasm. The light was overwhelming now, like the sun itself was trying to consume them. He could hear the whispers, the voices of the ancient beings that had been sealed away for so long. They were speaking to him, but he couldn't understand them. All he could hear was a low, rumbling growl, deep and resonant. The giants, their forms now fully revealed, were moving toward the chasm as well, their massive bodies blocking the way to escape. But they were no longer just mindless creatures. They were being controlled by the power beneath the earth, the power they had awakened. Dmitri felt a surge of energy as the ground shook violently. He could see it now, the massive figure emerging from the chasm, its form impossibly large, its shape shrouded in darkness. It was the true guardian, the thing that had been sealed away for centuries. The creature's eyes burned with ancient fury, its body rippling with an energy that felt like it was tearing the world apart. Dmitri knew, without a doubt, that they couldn't defeat it. There was no fighting this thing. They had unleashed the end of the world. But as the creature began to rise from the chasm, Dmitri made a choice. He wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Not without a fight. He turned to Mikhailov, his heart racing. "There's one thing we can do," Dmitri said, his voice firm. "We can fight." Mikhailov looked at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "No, Dmitri. It's too late." But Dmitri was already running. He ran toward the chasm, his rifle raised, his mind focused on one thing: survival. He didn't know how, but he knew they had to stop it. They had to stop the creature before it consumed everything. The guardians, the giants, they were just the beginning. The true monster had risen. As he reached the edge of the chasm, Dmitri took a deep breath, the air thick with the stench of death and ancient power. The creature's glowing eyes fixed on him, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, without hesitation, Dmitri leapt into the chasm. December 2nd, 1978. Dmitri felt the ground fall away beneath him as he plunged into the chasm. His body screamed as he tumbled through the darkness, the air rushing past him like a torrent, the world above slipping further and further away. He had no idea how far he was falling, or how long it would take before he hit the bottom. All he knew was that he had to do something, anything. This was the only chance they had left. His hands were trembling, his heart pounding in his chest. But he couldn't stop. The roar of the creature, the growl of the giants, still echoed in his mind. Mikhailov's warning rang in his ears: "It's too late, Dmitri. We've unleashed it." But Dmitri couldn't accept that. There had to be something they could do. The creature had been locked away for centuries. Surely there was a way to contain it again. He braced himself as the air rushed past him, his body twisting and turning in the darkness, his head spinning with the overwhelming speed of his fall. But then, just as he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the ground suddenly stopped. Dmitri slammed into something hard, his body crashing against a surface so cold it took his breath away. Pain shot through his ribs as he gasped for air, the world around him still spinning. But he pushed through it. He had to. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking away the dizziness, and found himself staring into an abyss even darker than the one he had just fallen from. His breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. The chasm stretched out infinitely, the walls too distant to see, the air thick with an unnatural fog. The temperature had dropped, the cold seeping into his bones. The world around him felt alive, its pulse like the beating of a heart, deep and rhythmic. Dmitri pushed himself to his feet, his hands shaking as he grabbed his rifle. He didn't know what was down here. He didn't know what he would find, but he had to keep moving. The giants, the guardians, the creature, they had all come from this place. The mountain had been the key, the gateway. And now, Dmitri was standing in the very heart of it. He walked slowly, his steps echoing in the silence. The further he went, the heavier the air became, pressing down on him like an unseen weight. His mind raced with questions, but he couldn't let himself get distracted. He had to find a way to stop it. Suddenly, a flicker of light caught his eye. It was small at first, just a glimmer in the distance, but it grew brighter as he moved closer. He stumbled forward, drawn to it, his feet moving faster with each step. The light was coming from what appeared to be a large, ornate door embedded in the wall of the chasm. Dmitri stopped in front of the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The door was ancient, its surface covered in the same runes and symbols he had seen in the vault, the same markings that had been on the giants. This was it. This was the heart of the mountain, the source of their power. The door seemed to pulse with energy, the symbols glowing faintly as though alive. Dmitri reached out, his fingers brushing the surface. The moment his skin made contact, the door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Inside, the walls were lined with the same symbols, but there was something even more unsettling. The room was filled with stone tablets, each one inscribed with strange text. At the center of the room, a large glowing crystal sat on a pedestal, its light pulsing with an eerie rhythm. Dmitri's eyes widened as he approached the crystal. It was beautiful, but there was something wrong about it. The air around it vibrated with power, and Dmitri could feel it, a force so ancient, so powerful. It made the very ground beneath him seem to shake. This was it. This was what the Guardians had been protecting. This was the source of the creature's power. But now that it was exposed, what would happen? Would the creatures continue their rampage? Or was there a way to stop them? As Dmitri reached out to touch the crystal, the ground trembled again. The chamber around him began to shift, the walls cracking as a low rumble filled the air. The crystal pulsed brighter, its light blinding, and Dmitri was forced to shield his eyes. And then, through the light, he heard it. A voice, low, guttural, and ancient. It echoed through the chamber, reverberating in his mind like a thunderclap. "You have awoken me, and now you will pay the price." The voice was not human. It was something older, something that had been buried beneath the earth for eons. And it was angry. Dmitri's heart raced as the ground cracked open beneath him, and he fell to his knees. The crystal's light flared brighter, the power surging through the chamber like a wave. He could feel it in his chest, the pressure building, suffocating him. The giants, the guardians, the creatures, they were all connected to this power. And now that it had been awakened, there was no turning back. December 2nd, 1978. The chamber trembled, the ground beneath Dmitri's knees cracking and shifting. The voice echoed in his mind again, deep and resonant, as though it were coming from the very earth itself. "You have awakened me, and now you will pay the price." Dmitri's heart raced in his chest, his breath shallow and frantic as the walls of the chamber groaned with the immense weight of the power he had just unleashed. The crystal at the center of the room pulsed with an eerie light, sending waves of energy rippling through the air. Dmitri felt as if the very air around him was becoming thicker, heavier, pressing down on his chest like a vice. He tried to push himself up, but his body refused to obey, weighed down by the intensity of the force around him. His vision blurred as the tremors beneath him grew more violent. The entire mountain seemed to be awakening, as though it had been lying dormant for eons, waiting for this moment to arrive. The voice returned, stronger now, as if the very mountains were speaking. "You do not understand the consequences of your actions, mortal. This world is mine. It has always been mine. And now, you have disturbed the balance." Dmitri gritted his teeth, his eyes fixed on the crystal. He had to do something. He had to stop it. There had to be a way to undo this. But how? What could he do against something this ancient, this powerful? He had no answers, no plan. All he knew was that the giants, the creatures, the guardians, they were all connected to this power. And now that the power had been awoken, nothing could stand in its way. With a surge of desperation, Dmitri reached for his rifle, hoping to find some way to fight back. But the crystal's light intensified, blinding him. The power coursing through the chamber was suffocating, an oppressive weight that crushed the breath from his lungs. And then, a voice. Not the one from the crystal, but a voice he knew, one that had haunted him from the very beginning. Dmitri. He spun around, his heart stopping in his chest. It was Mikhailov. The captain was standing in the doorway of the chamber, his face pale and drawn. But his eyes were fixed on Dmitri with a mixture of resignation and finality. "What are you doing here?" Dmitri asked, his voice hoarse, his mind struggling to process the sight in front of him. "We have to stop this, we have to." But Mikhailov shook his head slowly, cutting him off. "No, Dmitri, it's already too late." Mikhailov's voice was low, almost mournful. The guardians were never meant to be kept in check. They were protectors, yes, but they also carried the wrath of something far greater. We were never meant to control them. The mountain was a prison, but it was also a sanctuary. Dmitri's mind spun, his chest tightening. "What are you saying? You knew about this?" Mikhailov nodded, his face grim. "I knew more than I should have. The guardians, the giants, they are just the beginning. The true power is beneath the earth. And now that it's been awakened, there's no stopping it." Dmitri's breath caught in his throat. The true power. Mikhailov stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the crystal at the center of the room. "The creature you've awakened is no ordinary force. It is the source of the guardian's power. It was buried beneath the earth for a reason. We were never meant to disturb it." Dmitri's heart pounded in his chest as he took in the weight of Mikhailov's words. He had been so focused on stopping the giants, the guardians, the creatures, that he had failed to realize the true horror they had unleashed. The source, the crystal, wasn't just a power. It was the heart of the mountain. It was the prison, the key, the force that had kept the earth in balance. And now it was free. The air in the room grew colder, heavier. The light from the crystal flickered, and for a moment, Dmitri thought he saw something moving in the shadows, something far darker, far older than anything he had ever imagined. "It is too late for you," the voice from the crystal whispered, its tone dripping with malice. "You have awakened me. Now, you will witness the end." Dmitri felt the ground shake again, the walls of the chamber cracking as if the mountain itself were splitting apart. The force of the power was overwhelming, and Dmitri could feel his body being pulled toward the crystal, as though it were drawing him in, compelling him to come closer. Mikhailov turned to face him, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and acceptance. "There's no hope left, Dmitri. The mountain is waking, and with it, the end of everything." Dmitri's thoughts raced as he tried to comprehend what Mikhailov was saying. He had to stop it. He had to do something. But the mountain, the power, the creatures, everything was out of his control. And then, with a deafening roar, the ground cracked open beneath their feet. December 2nd, 1978. The chasm beneath Dmitri and Mikhailov split open wider, a yawning abyss of darkness that seemed to swallow everything around it. The tremors had escalated to violent quakes, shaking the very foundation of the mountain. The sound of cracking stone reverberated through the air, louder than the growls of the giants above, louder than anything Dmitri had ever heard. Dmitri stumbled backward, the pressure in the room growing unbearable. The walls were bending inward, the ceiling cracking as if the entire mountain was about to collapse. He could hear the voice of the ancient creature once more, louder this time, more powerful, reverberating in his skull. "You have released me, and now there is nothing left but your destruction." Mikhailov's eyes were wide with a mix of horror and acceptance, his body stiff with fear. He knew, as Dmitri now understood, that there was no stopping this force. The guardians, the giants, were mere instruments of something far more terrible. The true power, the creature at the heart of the mountain, was far beyond their comprehension. "It's over, Dmitri," Mikhailov whispered, his voice breaking. "The end has already begun." Dmitri's chest tightened as the words hit him like a hammer. He could feel the pull of the abyss below him, the force of the creature's power drawing him closer to the chasm fossum. His mind raced, his thoughts a blur of confusion and fear. How could this be happening? How could they have been so wrong? But even as the mountain seemed to collapse around them, Dmitri knew that he couldn't give up. He had to do something, anything. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the crushing weight of the darkness pressing in on him. "No," Dmitri said, his voice low but firm. "There has to be a way. We can't just let this happen." Mikhailov looked at him, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You still don't understand, do you? There is no way. We've released the Ancient One, and now we will all pay the price. The giants, the guardians, they were just the warning. The creature was always the true enemy." The ground trembled again, and Dmitri felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The crystal at the center of the room began to pulse with an even brighter light, its glow now blinding. The air was thick with the energy that seemed to radiate from the heart of the mountain. It was alive. It was hungry. Dmitri gripped his rifle tightly, his knuckles white. He had no plan, no strategy. But he couldn't just stand there and wait for the end. He had to act. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the glowing crystal, the source of the power that had awakened the mountain. The voice of the creature echoed in his mind, warning him, mocking him. "Foolish mortal, you think you can stop me? You think you can control what you have awakened?" Dmitri ignored the voice, his mind focused only on one thing, the crystal. He could feel the power surging through the room, trying to overwhelm him, to paralyze him with fear. But he couldn't stop. He had to reach the crystal. It was the heart of this nightmare, the key to everything. He reached it. His hands were trembling as he placed them on the smooth surface of the crystal. The moment he touched it, the world around him seemed to implode. The mountain roared. The walls of the chamber cracked and crumbled, the ground beneath Dmitri's feet shifting violently. He could feel the power of the ancient creature coursing through him, a force so immense, so overwhelming, that it felt as though the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. And then, something inside Dmitri clicked. It wasn't the crystal that controlled the power. It was the mountain itself, the mountain that had been holding the creature at bay for centuries. The crystal was a conduit. The true power lay within the heart of the earth. The guardians had been protectors, but they had also been a prison. And now that the prison was broken, there was no stopping what had been unleashed. Dmitri knew what he had to do. With every ounce of strength he had left, Dmitri pulled at the crystal. It was heavier than he could have imagined, but he didn't stop. The chamber shook violently, the crystal groaning as it resisted. The voice of the creature screamed in his mind, trying to force him back, but Dmitri held on. He couldn't let it win. Not like this. With a final desperate pull, Dmitri wrenched the crystal from its pedestal. The moment it left its place, the mountain trembled once more. But this time, there was a shift, a momentary stillness. For a fleeting second, Dmitri thought he might have succeeded. But then, with a deafening roar, the chasm below him erupted. The walls cracked open, and the darkness poured out. The creature was free. December 2nd, 1978. The world around Dmitri crumbled. The creature's roar reverberated through the chasm, shaking the very core of the mountain. The walls around him cracked and split, the air thick with the weight of ancient power. Dmitri's hands tightened around the crystal. his muscles straining under the pressure. But it felt as if the mountain itself was resisting him. He stumbled backward, the ground beneath him shaking with an intensity that nearly knocked him off his feet. The crystal pulsed in his hands, its glow blinding, and Dmitri could feel the immense force that flowed through it. The creature, the true guardian, was free, and with it came the wrath of an ancient power that had been buried beneath the earth for eons. Dmitri turned to face Mikhailov, but the captain was nowhere to be seen. The darkness of the chamber had swallowed him up, and the roar of the creature grew louder with each passing second. Dmitri's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to focus on the task at hand, but the weight of the power he was holding was too much. The mountain trembled again, and this time, it wasn't just the walls that were breaking. The very foundation of the earth was cracking, the ground splitting open as the creature began to rise from the depths. Dmitri's breath hitched as he looked down at the chasm below him, the abyss opening wider, its blackness seeming to swallow everything in its path. And then, with a low growl, the creature emerged. It was massive, its form shifting in the shadows as it rose from the depths of the mountain. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, and its body rippled with ancient power. It was unlike anything Dmitri had ever seen, its shape a twisted blend of shadow and stone, its presence a force that made the very air around them crackle with energy. Dmitri could feel it, its power, its hunger, its rage. It was ancient, primal, and it had been waiting for this moment. And now that it was free, there would be no stopping it. The crystal in Dmitri's hands pulsed again, as if in response to the creature's presence. The mountain itself groaned, the ground shaking violently as the creature took its first steps toward him. Dmitri could hear the giants in the distance, their roars filling the air as they moved closer. But it didn't matter anymore. They were no match for what had been awakened. Dmitri's thoughts raced, but his body moved on instinct. He had to do something, anything to stop this. The crystal was the key. He knew that now. But how could he control it? How could he stop a force this ancient? The creature's glowing eyes fixed on Dmitri, its massive form moving toward him with purpose. Dmitri's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, his mind struggling to make sense of the situation. There was no way out, no escape. The mountain was alive with the power of the creature, and it was too late to stop it. But then, a sudden realization struck him. He wasn't alone. Mikhailov had reappeared at the far end of the chamber, his face grim as he watched the creature approach. He didn't speak, but his eyes met Dmitri's, and in that brief moment, Dmitri understood. Mikhailov had known this was coming. He had known that the creature was too powerful to stop. But there was one thing left to do. The vault. Dmitri's heart raced as the memory of Mikhailov's words flooded his mind. The vault had been their last hope, the last place where the creature could be contained. But the question remained. Could they still reach it? Could they still stop it before it was too late? The creature was getting closer. Dmitri could feel the heat radiating from its body, the power rolling off it in waves. There was no time left. He had to act now. With a sudden burst of energy, Dmitri turned and sprinted toward the far wall of the chamber, where the vault doors were hidden. His legs burned with the effort, his heart pounding in his chest. But he couldn't stop. The creature was nearly upon him. If he didn't reach the vault, everything was lost. He reached the vault door, his hands trembling as he tried to access the controls. The door was locked, but Dmitri didn't hesitate. He knew the code. He'd seen it before, etched into the walls of the base. His fingers flew over the terminal, the hum of the machine filling the air as the door slowly began to open. And then, the ground shook again. The light from the crystal flared, and Dmitri knew he had only moments before everything fell apart. The vault door opened just enough for him to slip through, and without thinking, he pushed inside. As the door slammed shut behind him, Dmitri looked around. The vault was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was massive, stretching out for miles beneath the mountain, its walls lined with ancient runes and symbols. The air here was thick with power, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp and twist with every breath. And at the center of the vault was what Dmitri had been looking for, the source of the creature's power. A dark, pulsating orb, its surface covered in the same runes that had appeared throughout the mountain. Dmitri's eyes widened as he realized what it was. This was the heart of the mountain, the creature's true source, and he had to destroy it. December 2nd, 1978. The vault was silent. Dmitri stood before the dark, pulsating orb, his body trembling as the weight of what he had to do sank in. The room seemed to pulse with the orb's energy, the air thick with a power so ancient, it felt as if it could swallow everything whole. The walls were covered in runes, glowing faintly in the low light, a warning to those who dared to enter this sacred space. This was it, the heart of the mountain, the source of the creature's power, and the only thing that could stop the nightmare that had been unleashed. Dmitri took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he reached for the rifle slung across his back. His mind raced with the enormity of the situation. The creature, the giants, the guardians, they had all come from this place. And now, in this moment, Dmitri had to destroy it. But how? The orb was too powerful, too ancient. He had no idea what it was capable of, or how to even begin to stop it. Mikhailov's words echoed in his mind. This is the heart of the mountain, the true source of the power. You must destroy it. If you don't, everything will be lost. Dmitri stepped closer to the orb, his body pulling back as if instinctively resisting the dark energy emanating from it. But he couldn't stop now. He had to end it. He had to put an end to the terror that had been unleashed on the world. The orb was alive, its surface undulating like a beating heart, its power so intense it made Dmitri's head swim. He could feel it calling to him, a force stronger than anything he had ever experienced. It was tempting in a way, offering him the power to control it all. But Dmitri knew better. There was no controlling this, no taming it. This was a force that had been locked away for centuries for a reason. He reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the orb. The moment he made contact, the mountain itself seemed to react. The ground trembled, and the walls of the vault groaned as though the very earth was waking up. Dmitri staggered back, pulling his hand away. But it was too late. The orb had sensed him. It was awake, and it was listening. A low hum filled the chamber, the energy in the air thickening, suffocating Dmitri. He gasped for breath as the light from the orb intensified, the runes on the walls blazing to life. The entire mountain seemed to be coming alive, its heartbeat matching the pulsing of the orb. The creature, the guardian, was calling to it. And then, in an instant, the ground beneath Dmitri's feet cracked open. The vault shook violently as the fissures spread out from the center of the chamber, sending shockwaves through the mountain. Dmitri fell to his knees, the power of the orb overwhelming him, forcing him to the ground. The light from the orb flared brighter, blinding him, and a voice echoed in his mind, deep, guttural, and ancient. "Foolish mortal, you think you can stop me?" The voice was like thunder in his skull, vibrating through his very bones. Dmitri's heart pounded in his chest as the air around him grew thick with energy. He could feel it now, the creature was coming. The guardians, the giants, had been mere servants to this force, protectors of the power buried beneath the earth. But now the true master of the mountain was free, and there was nothing Dmitri could do to stop it. The ground cracked open wider, and the ceiling above began to crumble, sending stones crashing down around him. Dmitri tried to rise, but the force of the orb's energy held him in place, pinning him to the ground. "You cannot defeat me. You have released me, and now you will pay the price." Dimitri's vision swam as the chamber collapsed around him, the walls cracking and splintering as the mountain seemed to explode from the inside. The orb pulsed brighter with each passing second, the energy surging through the chamber like a storm. Dimitri's mind reeled, the creature's presence overwhelming him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he could feel was the raw power of the orb, the ancient force that had been buried for centuries, and now it was free. The giants were no longer needed. The guardians were no longer protectors. The true enemy was here, and it was far beyond anything Dimitri could have imagined. "You are nothing to me," the voice rumbled, its tone dripping with contempt. "You and all who came before you are nothing but dust. You will be forgotten." Dimitri gasped for air, but the pressure in the chamber was too much. The very mountain was collapsing, the ground splitting open as the creature's power consumed everything around it. And then, a blinding light filled the chamber. Dimitri shut his eyes against the brilliance, his body convulsing as the energy of the orb surged through him. He could feel the power coursing through his veins, the very fabric of reality bending and warping around him. It was too much. He couldn't control it. No one could. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the light vanished. December 2nd, 1978. Dimitri opened his eyes slowly, but the world around him was no longer the same. The chamber had collapsed, the walls shattered into jagged pieces, and the once solid ground had crumbled away into a vast, bottomless abyss. The mountain itself seemed to groan in agony as the air hummed with a dark electric energy. The orb's light had vanished, but its presence lingered, an oppressive force pressing down on everything. Dimitri's head spun, his body still trembling from the raw power he had been exposed to. The creature, the true guardian of the mountain, was somewhere close, somewhere in the depths of this destruction. But where? And what had it done? The mountain was falling apart. He could feel it. Its heart had been torn open, and now it was bleeding. The very foundation of the world seemed to be unraveling, the sky above clouded with an unnatural darkness. Dimitri staggered to his feet, his legs unsteady, his mind a blur of chaos. The air was thick with the remnants of the creature's power, and the ground beneath him shifted again, a low rumble signaling the mountain's collapse. The vault, once the last hope for containing the horror, was now nothing more than a broken husk. Everything they had tried to protect was gone. And yet, the force that had been awakened was still there, still alive. He reached for his rifle, the familiar weight in his hands grounding him. But even that felt small compared to the immensity of the situation. Nothing, not even their weapons, could stand against this power. The giants, the guardians, had been mere pawns in the creature's game. They had been the protectors, but the true monster, the one that had been buried for eons, was now in control. The silence that had fallen over the chamber was suffocating. The roar of the giants, the rumble of the collapsing earth, it had all stopped, leaving only the quiet, unsettling hum of the creature's presence. Dimitri could feel it now, a weight pressing on his chest, suffocating him. The energy in the air was almost tangible, like the mountain itself was alive. Its heartbeat, the pulse of something far older, far more dangerous than anything Dimitri had ever encountered. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the chamber. Dimitri froze, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't alone. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was the creature. It stood at the center of the crumbling chamber, its massive form outlined by the eerie glow of the orb. Its eyes burned with a cold, malevolent fire, its body rippling with energy that seemed to warp the very air around it. The ground beneath it crackled and groaned as it took a step forward, its claws scraping against the broken stone. Dimitri's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his rifle, but the creature didn't move. It didn't need to. The air grew heavier, thick with the weight of its power. "You are nothing," The voice echoed in Dimitri's mind again, its tone dripping with disdain. "You think you can stop me? You are weak, mortal. You have no power here." Dimitri gritted his teeth, but his hands shook as he held the rifle. He knew it was pointless. He knew that nothing he could do would stop the creature. But he couldn't just stand there. He couldn't give up. The creature's eyes locked onto him, its gaze cold and calculating. For a moment, Dimitri thought he saw something flicker, something almost human, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by the overwhelming force that emanated from the creature. This was not a being of flesh and blood. It was something more, something that had existed long before humanity had risen to power. It was the ancient force that had been buried beneath the earth, and now it was free, and there was no stopping it. The ground shook once more, and Dimitri felt the pressure of the creature's power intensify like a storm cloud gathering above him. The creature stepped forward again, its massive form casting a shadow over him. Dimitri knew that if he didn't act now, if he didn't do something to stop it, it would all be over. With a surge of desperation, Dimitri dropped to his knees, clutching the rifle in both hands, his mind racing. There had to be something, anything that could stop this. But what? He couldn't fight it. He couldn't even touch it. And then he remembered the vault, the power of the crystal, the light. The creature's gaze flickered toward the broken pedestal where the orb had once sat. It was as if it knew Dimitri's thoughts, as if it understood the plan that was forming in his mind. But it was too late. Dimitri's mind snapped into focus. He had no time to waste. The creature was too close, too powerful. He pushed himself up, gripping the rifle tightly, and charged. December 2nd, 1978. Dimitri's heart was pounding in his chest as he charged forward, the rifle gripped tightly in his hands. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the mountain itself were trying to stop him. The creature's eyes, glowing with malice and ancient power, tracked his every movement. He could feel the weight of its gaze like an invisible force pressing against him, pulling at his very soul. But Dimitri didn't slow down. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, his body screaming and protesting. He was running on instinct now, fueled by desperation. The creature was right. He had no power here. But he wasn't going to let the end come without a fight. The ground trembled beneath him again, the chamber shaking as the creature moved toward him. Its massive form loomed larger, casting a shadow over Dimitri that seemed to stretch for miles. Every muscle in Dimitri's body screamed for him to stop, to turn back. But he couldn't. There was no turning back now. He reached the pedestal where the orb had once rested, its empty surface cold and lifeless. But as Dimitri stopped, he realized something. The orb wasn't the only source of power in this chamber. There were other artifacts, scattered throughout the room, strange relics that hummed with energy. Runes were etched into their surfaces, glowing faintly in the dim light. His mind raced as he scanned the room. The creature was almost upon him now, its massive form shaking the ground with every step. But Dimitri's eyes locked onto one relic in particular. It was a stone tablet, its surface covered in glowing symbols. He could feel the energy radiating from it, powerful and familiar. The same power he had felt when he touched the orb. Dimitri knew what he had to do. He sprinted to the tablet, grabbing it with both hands. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy shot through his body, a shockwave of power that made his teeth rattle. The air around him crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality seeming to bend and warp. The creature let out a deafening roar, its eyes flaring with rage as it moved toward him. But Dimitri didn't back down. He gritted his teeth and focused on the tablet, pushing against the wave of power that threatened to overwhelm him. He could feel the energy coursing through his veins, the power of the mountain itself surging into him. It was intoxicating, and for a moment, Dmitri thought he could control it. But the creature wasn't finished yet. It lunged at Dmitri, its claws reaching for him with terrifying speed. Dmitri barely managed to raise the rifle in time, firing a shot at the creature. But the bullet did nothing. It was as if the creature was impervious to everything, as if it were made of stone itself. The mountain shook once more, the chamber collapsing around them. Dmitri's body was thrown backward by the force of the explosion. The tablet slipped from his hands, the power inside it fading as it rolled out of reach. The creature was upon him now, its massive form towering over him, its eyes glowing with an almost sadistic glee. Dmitri's body screamed in pain as the creature's claws dug into his chest, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. This was it. This was the end. But as the creature prepared to strike the final blow, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath them cracked open, the earth splitting apart, as a brilliant light flooded the chamber. Dmitri could barely see through the blinding brilliance, but he could feel the power, the energy radiating from the chasm below. The creature roared in pain, its grip on Dmitri loosening for just a moment. In that moment of hesitation, Dmitri knew what he had to do. With every ounce of strength left in his body, he reached for the stone tablet, his fingers closing around it, just as the creature's claws began to tear into him again. The power surged through him, filling him with an overwhelming force that he couldn't control. It was as if the very mountain itself was reaching out, using Dmitri as a conduit to unleash its power. The light grew brighter, the ground trembling beneath them as the creature howled in agony. Dmitri could feel the power building, surging through his body like a storm. The creature's roar was drowned out by the energy that filled the air. And for a brief moment, Dmitri thought he might lose himself in it. But he fought it back. I have to stop it. He clung to that thought as the power coursed through him. He wasn't sure how he was doing it, but he could feel the creature being pulled back, dragged into the abyss from which it had come. And then, with one final deafening roar, the creature was gone. The mountain went silent. The light dimmed, and Dmitri collapsed to the ground, his body shaking with exhaustion. He could feel the energy in the air fading, the power that had once been so overwhelming, now receding like the tide. The chamber was still, save for the distant rumble of the collapsing mountain. But the creature was gone, and with it, the threat had ended. Dmitri's vision blurred, his body weak from the strain of what had just happened. He could barely keep his eyes open, but as he looked around, he saw nothing but ruin. The mountain was collapsing, the walls breaking apart, as the last of the guardians fell. He had done it. The nightmare was over. December 3rd, 1978. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Dmitri lay on the ground, his body battered and broken, his mind a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. The power that had surged through him had left him drained, hollowed out. He could feel the remnants of the energy still vibrating in the air, but the overwhelming force that had once filled the mountain was now gone. The guardians, the giants, the creature, they had all been silenced, banished back into the abyss from which they had come. But there was no victory to celebrate, no relief. Dmitri pushed himself up weakly, his legs trembling beneath him as he took in the destruction around him. The vault, once a place of containment, was now a shattered ruin. The walls were cracked and crumbling, the ceiling above them a jagged mess of stone and debris. The mountain was collapsing, its ancient foundation unable to withstand the forces that had been unleashed. Everything they had fought for was gone. The base, the survivors, the hope for a future had all been consumed by the chaos. Dmitri's heart sank as he realized the cost of their actions. They had destroyed the creature, but they had also torn apart the very fabric of their world. His breath caught in his throat as he staggered toward the remnants of the control panel. The screens were flickering, static buzzing from the broken devices. There was nothing left. No answers. No more hope. The rumbling beneath him intensified again, the ground shaking as the mountain continued to fracture, threatening to swallow him whole. Dmitri turned, glancing back at the fissure where the creature had emerged. The glowing energy that had once filled the chamber was fading, leaving only darkness in its wake. The light that had consumed everything was now gone, leaving behind a hollow, lifeless emptiness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Mikhailov. His face was grim, his eyes hollow from the ordeal. But he was alive. Dmitri's heart lurched with a mixture of relief and sorrow as he watched the captain approach. Mikhailov had been a part of it all. He had known the truth from the beginning. They had both played a role in the case that had unfolded. "We did it," Dmitri said, his voice barely a whisper. "We stopped it." Mikhailov didn't answer immediately. He stood in the wreckage, his eyes scanning the devastation. There was no relief in his expression, only the weight of what had happened. "No, Dmitri," Mikhailov replied softly, his voice heavy with regret. "We didn't stop it. We only delayed the inevitable. The creature, the power beneath the mountain, it wasn't the end. It was only a glimpse of what's to come." Dmitri stared at him, his mind racing. "What are you saying?" He had thought it was over. He had thought they had won. But the captain's words struck him like a cold wave. "The mountain," Mikhailov continued, "wasn't just a prison. It was a seal, a barrier. When we released the creature, we didn't just set it free. We shattered the seal. What's beneath us, what was kept locked away for centuries, it's still there. And now, it will come for us." Dmitri's blood ran cold as the weight of Mikhailov's words sank in. The creatures, the guardians, they were only the beginning. The true force, the thing that had been contained for so long, was still out there. And now, it was awake. "We're too late," Dmitri said, the realization hitting him like a wave. "There's nothing we can do. The world, it's over." Mikhailov nodded slowly, his face dark with acceptance. "We've done what we could. But we were never meant to stop this. It was always beyond us." The rumbling grew louder, and Dmitri turned toward the chasm again, his heart sinking as he watched the ground beneath them crack even further. The mountainside seemed to collapse inward, the very earth breaking apart, as if it were giving way to something even darker. Suddenly, the ground beneath them split open violently, sending a shockwave of energy rippling through the chamber. Dmitri barely had time to react before he was thrown to the ground, his body slammed against the jagged stone. A dark figure loomed above him, its eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. It was huge, even more so than the giants, its form a silhouette of pure malevolence against the dark sky. The creature's claws were long, sharp, and its body rippled with the raw energy that had once been sealed beneath the mountain. The mountain had not died. It had only shifted. And with that shift, a new nightmare had been born. War horror storytelling. Assistant Pro ensures plain text output. Exactly 5,000 characters excluding whitespace, no headings, no Foley, YouTube compliant. Optimate for American English narration, always reports progress. And next part. And confirms no digits are present. December 3rd, 1978. Dmitri's heart stopped as the massive form of the creature loomed above him, its glowing eyes locking onto him with a hunger that sent a chill down his spine. The ground beneath them had cracked wide open, the very mountain itself shaking in the grip of the ancient power that was now free. The mountainside was collapsing, the world around him crumbling into chaos. The earth was breaking apart, and there was no escape. The creature, larger than anything Dmitri had ever seen, moved with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. Its massive claws scraped against the stone, sending sparks flying as it stepped forward. The air around it charged with an energy so intense it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Dmitri could feel the weight of its presence, pressing down on him, suffocating him with its sheer magnitude. Dmitri could barely move. His legs were weak from the toll of everything that had happened, the exhaustion of the battle, the overwhelming weight of what had been unleashed. The ground trembled once again, and the creature's eyes glowed brighter, its body rippling with the force of its energy. The giants, the guardians, they had been mere heralds, the creatures of legend that had guarded the secrets of the mountain. But this thing, this beast was something far more ancient, more terrifying. You, Dmitri gasped, trying to speak, but his voice faltered. He couldn't even begin to understand what was happening. Everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed, seemed to have been for nothing. The creature's voice rumbled through his mind, low and guttural, like thunder in his skull. You foolish mortal. You thought you could contain what was never meant to be contained? The voice echoed in the very air, reverberating through Dmitri's bones. I am the darkness that sleeps beneath the earth. I am the mountain itself, and I have come to reclaim what is mine. Dmitri's heart raced as he looked up at the creature, realizing with cold clarity what Mikhailov had meant. This was no mere guardian, no simple protector of the mountain. This was the source of everything, the true power that had been buried beneath the earth for centuries. The giants, the guardians, the legends, they had been nothing more than tools, instruments of control for something far darker, far older. The creature took another step forward, its shadow falling over Dmitri like a whiff of doom. His breath hitched as he tried to move, but his body refused to cooperate. The air was thick with the creature's power, and every movement felt like it took 100 years. The creature opened its mouth, and a deafening roar shook the very foundation of the mountain. It was a sound of pure rage, of ancient fury, that had been locked away for millennia. Dmitri's ears rang with the force of it, his vision spinning as the air around him grew hotter, thicker, with an unnatural heat. The mountain itself was waking up, the power of the creature spreading through the cracks in the earth. The ground shook violently, and Dmitri barely managed to keep his footing. The creature's massive form loomed closer, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire that seemed to pierce through him. Dmitri's thoughts raced as the world around him descended into chaos. He had to stop it. He had to do something, end this nightmare. The crystal, the orbit, had been a key. It had been the conduit for the creature's power. But now that the creature was free, nothing could stop it. The mountain, once a prison, had become a weapon, and Dmitri was standing at the heart of it. I cannot stop this, Dmitri thought, his mind numbed by the overwhelming reality of their situation. No one can. Suddenly, from behind him, Mikhailov's voice broke through the chaos. Dmitri, get out of here. Dmitri turned, but the sight that met his eyes froze him in place. Mikhailov was standing at the edge of the crumbling vault, his body silhouetted against the fiery glow of the mountain's collapse. In his hands, he held a device, an emergency detonator. A weapon. A last resort. Mikhailov, Dmitri shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the creature. What are you doing? Mikhailov's face was grim, his eyes hollow with resignation. It's the only way, Dmitri. We have to contain it. Dmitri's heart skipped a beat as Mikhailov began to move toward the device's controls, his fingers moving quickly across the buttons. No, Dmitri whispered, the horror of realization dawning on him. Mikhailov, stop! You can't! But it was too late. The countdown began, a loud beeping filling the air as Mikhailov pressed the final button. The ground shook with renewed violence, the mountain groaning as if it were alive. The air crackled with energy, the power of the creature reaching a fever pitch. The creature turned toward Mikhailov, its eyes blazing with fury as it took a step forward. But Mikhailov didn't flinch. He stood firm, his face set in a hard mask of determination. "We have no choice," he muttered, almost to himself. "We have to end it now." The beeping grew louder, the countdown nearing its end. Dmitri couldn't move, couldn't speak. All he could do was watch as the final moments played out before him. The creature's massive claws reached for Mikhailov, its rage unleashed. And then, the world exploded. December 3rd, 1978. The explosion was deafening. For a moment, Dmitri was engulfed by pure white light, blinding and overwhelming. His body was thrown backward, pain searing through his chest as the force of the blast sent him tumbling across the fractured ground. The walls of the mountain collapsed around him, the earth shaking violently, and all he could hear was the deafening roar of the explosion, the rumbling that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth itself. And then, silence. Dmitri lay motionless on the ground, his body bruised and battered, his breath ragged as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. His vision swam as he struggled to push himself to his feet, his head pounding, his ears ringing. But the only thing he could think of was Mikhailov, the captain, the sacrifice. The creature was gone. The pulse of energy that had filled the air was fading, and the light from the chasm dimmed. Dmitri tried to stand, but his legs were weak. He could feel the air around him, still thick with the power of the explosion, but it was quieter now. The mountain itself seemed to be holding its breath. With great effort, Dmitri pushed himself to his knees, his eyes searching the rubble, looking for Mikhailov. He had seen him at the last moment, holding the detonator, his face set in grim resolve. The sacrifice had been made, but Dmitri wasn't sure if it was enough. Was it over? The ground beneath him trembled again, but this time it was different. The shaking was less violent, more like a whisper. Dmitri looked up, his heart pounding as he scanned the horizon. The wreckage of the base, now a landscape of destruction. And then, he saw it. From the shadows of the ruined vault, a figure emerged. It was Mikhailov. Dmitri's heart leaped in his chest as he saw the captain standing, his face battered and bloodied, but still alive. The detonator was gone, but Mikhailov was still breathing. Dmitri pushed himself to his feet, rushing toward him. But the captain's eyes were distant, his movements slow and labored. Mikhailov raised a hand, his voice hoarse. "Dmitri, it's not over." Dmitri stopped in his tracks, confusion flooding his mind. "What do you mean? You set off the device. You destroyed it." "The creature, it's gone." Mikhailov's eyes darkened, his expression fond. "No, Dmitri. We destroyed the physical manifestation. But the true power, the true source of it all, it's still here. In the mountain, in the earth. We've only delayed it." Dmitri's stomach twisted as the weight of Mikhailov's words sank in. Delayed it. He had thought they had won. He had thought they had stopped the nightmare. Mikhailov staggered forward, his voice barely a whisper. The creature, the power beneath the earth, it was never meant to be contained. It's a force that cannot be destroyed, only sealed away. But sealing it, the cost is too great. It will return, Dmitri. It always does. Dmitri's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. They had never truly defeated it. The mountain had been a prison, and in breaking it open, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. Mikhailov's body trembled as he collapsed to his knees, his face pale. The strain of what had happened, the power he had unleashed, was taking its toll. Dmitri rushed to his side, his hands shaking as he tried to steady the captain. We have to stop it," Dmitri said, his voice breaking. "There has to be a way." Mikhailov shook his head weakly, his eyes filled with regret. No, Dmitri, it's over. The cost of this, it's too much. You've seen what happened. You've seen the destruction. There's nothing left to fight for. The world has already paid the price. Dmitri stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. The world has already paid the price. The cost of their actions had been catastrophic, and even now, the consequences were far from over. The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't the mountain. It was the earth itself. Dmitri looked up, his eyes wide with terror. And then, from the depths of the shattered vault, a voice whispered, "It is time." The mountain groaned, its ancient foundations shifting, as if awakening from a long slumber. The crystal that had once been at the center of the vault pulsed faintly, its glow now dim, but still present. Dmitri could feel it, the power that had been buried for centuries, the force that had been sealed away. And it was rising again. December 3rd, 1978. The mountain rumbled again, its deep guttural growls vibrating through the very air, as though the earth itself was alive with fury. Dmitri stood frozen, the weight of Mikhailov's words still heavy in his chest. The creature hadn't been destroyed. The true source of the power, the force they had unleashed, was far from gone. It was still here, stirring beneath their feet, waiting to break free. Dmitri looked at Mikhailov, who was now slumped against the shattered stone, his breathing shallow, his face pale. The captain was barely conscious, the strain of everything they had endured clearly taking its toll. But Dmitri could see the regret in Mikhailov's eyes, the silent understanding of what was happening. They had failed. There is no stopping it. Mikhailov's words echoed in Dmitri's mind. The ground continued to shake as the rumblings grew louder, the tremors intensifying. Dmitri staggered to his feet, his hands shaking, his breath shallow. The power that had been unleashed wasn't just the creature. It was the mountain itself. The dark energy beneath the earth had risen, and now there was no way to contain it. And yet, deep down, Dmitri knew that something had to be done. He couldn't let the world be consumed by this nightmare. He couldn't let this power, this force, bring an end to everything. With a shaky breath, he turned away from Mikhailov, his gaze fixed on the distance. The mountain's heart, the source of the creature's power, was drawing closer, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. It wasn't just a force of nature. It was something far more ancient, something that had existed long before mankind had ever walked the earth. The guardians, the giants, had been protectors of the mountain, but they were nothing more than pawns, and the true enemy was now awake. Dmitri had no plan, no way to stop what was happening, but he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The creatures, the monsters, they had been a force of terror, but now it was clear that there was something more terrifying than all of them combined. He took a step forward, his rifle still clutched in his hands, though it felt useless against the power that was filling the air. The mountain continued to tremble, and the growls grew louder, like a deep, resonating hum from the very core of the earth. The ground cracked beneath his feet as fissures opened, sending a flash of light through the chamber. But Dmitri didn't stop. He had to try. He had to do something. The power was rising, and with it, the darkness. Dmitri didn't know how much time he had left, but he wasn't going to give up. Suddenly, he heard a low guttural growl behind him, and he spun around, raising his rifle instinctively. The shadows shifted, and there, emerging from the depths of the vault, was a figure. But it wasn't the creature he had faced before. It was the giant. Dmitri's breath caught in his throat as the enormous figure stepped forward, its massive form moving with an eerie grace. The giant's glowing eyes were fixed on him, and for a moment it seemed like time had stopped. The giant was no longer a mindless creature. No longer just a force of nature. It had been transformed by the power of the mountain, by the dark energy that had been released. And now, it was a part of something far greater. Dmitri didn't have time to react. The giant lunged, its massive claws reaching out for him. He fired, but the bullets had no effect. The giant swiped at him with a speed that was impossible for its size, sending Dmitri flying backward. He slammed into the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He struggled to stand, but the giant was already upon him, its eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. Dmitri raised his rifle again, but he knew it was futile. There was no way he could stop it, no way to defeat the force that was controlling it. And then, as the giant loomed over him, ready to strike, a voice echoed in the distance, a voice Dmitri had only heard in whispers. "Beware. You have freed me, and now you will witness my wrath." The creature, the true power of the mountain. It had been watching, waiting, and now it was coming for him. The ground split open beneath Dmitri's feet, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the energy of the creature's power. Dmitri could feel the ground tremble, as if the earth itself was coming alive. There was no escape. December 3rd, 1978. Dmitri could feel the ground shaking beneath him, the rumbling growing louder, deeper. The mountain itself was alive, awakening, responding to the presence of the ancient power that had been freed. The fissures in the earth spread further, cracking open the very foundations of the world around him. The air was thick with energy, heavy and oppressive, as if the atmosphere itself was vibrating with the power of the creature. The giant loomed over him, its glowing eyes fixed on Dmitri with a malevolent intensity. Its massive form seemed to pulse with dark energy, its claws glinting like knives in the dim light. Dmitri barely managed to push himself to his knees, the pain from his fall still sharp in his ribs. He could feel the weight of the creature's gaze, suffocating him. And in that moment, all hope seemed to vanish. But Dmitri knew one thing. He couldn't give up. He had to stop it. There was no other option. If the creature was allowed to rise fully, if its power continued to spread, it would consume everything. There would be nothing left. With a sudden surge of strength, Dmitri forced himself to his feet, his rifle still gripped tightly in his hands, though he knew it would be useless against the giant. The creature's power was far beyond anything he could comprehend, and its presence was suffocating, like the mountain itself was closing in on him. The giant took a step forward, its massive foot shaking the ground beneath them. Dmitri's breath quickened, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He had no plan, no way to defeat the creature, but he couldn't stop now. He had to find a way. He had to do something. But as the giant raised its clawed hand ready to strike, Dmitri heard something, a voice. It wasn't the creature. It wasn't the giant. It was Mikhailov. Dmitri turned, his eyes wide with disbelief. Through the haze of the shaking mountain and the chaos that surrounded him, he saw Mikhailov, standing at the edge of the chasm, his body bloodied but still alive. The captain's face was determined, his eyes locked onto the creature as if he had made a decision. "No!" Dmitri shouted, stumbling toward him. "Mikhailov, you can't! It's too late!" "We can't." But Mikhailov raised his hand, silencing Dmitri with a single gesture. His voice was quiet, but filled with the weight of finality. "It's not over yet," Mikhailov said, his voice steady. "We can still do this." Dmitri's heart sank. How? How do we stop this? Mikhailov turned to face him, his eyes filled with an ancient understanding. "We don't stop it. Not in Orly. We can't fight it. But we can contain it. We can lock it away again. We can keep it from destroying everything." Dmitri didn't understand. Contain it? How was that possible? They had already failed. The mountain was breaking apart. The creatures had been set free. Mikhailov nodded as if reading Dmitri's thoughts. The vault. The key. You remember the vault. The place where the power was kept. Dmitri's mind raced, trying to make sense of Mikhailov's words. The vault had been destroyed. The crystal shattered. The heart of the mountain had been breached. How could they possibly contain the power now? You have to trust me, Mikhailov said, his voice filled with urgency. The mountain isn't just a prison. It's a seal. There's a way to lock the power back. But we need the crystal. We need to complete the cycle. The realization hit Dmitri like a punch to the gut. The crystal, the very thing that had been at the center of everything. It wasn't just a source of power. It was the key to containment. But it was gone. The explosion had destroyed it. But Mikhailov was shaking his head. No. The crystal is a conduit. It was always meant to channel the energy. But the true key, the heart of the mountain, has always been here. The source of the power. He turned to the chasm. His eyes focused on the creature. That's what the Guardians protected, and now we can use it to seal it away. Dmitri's mind spun, the gravity of the situation sinking in. He looked at Mikhailov, his eyes desperate. Where is it? How do we do it? Mikhailov's gaze darkened. We have to get to the center, the heart of the chasm, the source. But we can't do it alone. The giants will fight us. The mountain will fight us. But if we don't do it now, everything is lost. Dmitri's breath hitched as he turned toward the chasm, the creature still standing at its center, its dark eyes fixed on them. The power radiating from it was almost unbearable, and Dmitri could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. But there was no time to think. They had to act now. With a single nod, Dmitri turned to Mikhailov. Let's do it. Together, they moved toward the heart of the chasm. The final confrontation now unavoidable. December 3rd, 1978. Dmitri's legs burned as he ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he didn't dare slow down. The world was falling apart around him. Every step he took felt like a race against time. The mountain had come alive, its ancient power spreading out like an unstoppable force. The ground shook beneath his feet. The very earth groaning in pain as if it, too, was rebelling against the forces they had awakened. Mikhailov was beside him, his face grim but determined. The captain's steps were steady, his focus locked on the goal ahead. The heart of the chasm, where the true source of the mountain's power lay. The creature, the true guardian, stood between them and their only chance of stopping this nightmare. The pulse of energy from the chasm grew stronger with each step they took, vibrating the air, forcing Dmitri to press forward with all the strength he had left. The creature, massive and terrifying, loomed ahead, its glowing eyes fixed on them. It was waiting, its body rippling with ancient power, its enormous form blocking the path forward. Dmitri! Mikhailov called, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We don't have much time. The creature's power is growing, and if we don't reach the heart now, we'll never get another chance. Dmitri nodded, his pulse quickening as they drew closer. He could feel the power radiating from the creature, the energy seeping into the very ground beneath his feet. It was as though the mountain itself was a living being, responding to the awakening of its true force. Dmitri clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. There was no going back. This was their only shot. They reached the edge of the chasm, the creature standing before them, its massive claws digging into the stone, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. The creature's growl rumbled through the air, a deep guttural sound that sent a chill down Dmitri's spine. It was watching them, waiting for them to make a move. But Dmitri didn't hesitate. He knew what had to be done. With a sudden burst of movement, Dmitri charged, his rifle raised. But the creature reacted faster. It swung its massive claw, knocking Dmitri aside with terrifying strength. He crashed to the ground, the impact jarring every bone in his body. The world spun, and for a moment, everything was a blur of pain and commotion. But Mikhailov was right there, pulling Dmitri back to his feet, urgency in his eyes. "Don't stop. We can't let it stop us now." Dmitri staggered, his legs shaking with exhaustion. But he pushed forward. He couldn't afford to fall now. He couldn't let the creature win. Together they reached the center of the chasm, where the heart of the mountain lay. The air was thick with the pulsing energy, and Dmitri could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, as though the very earth was pulling him into its depths. The creature was behind them, its growls echoing in the distance, but it was no longer their primary concern. At the center of the chasm was a massive stone altar, its surface carved with runes and symbols, glowing with an eerie light. The altar was the source of the power, the heart of the mountain. Dmitri could feel it. The creature, the giants, the guardians, they were all bound to it. And now, it was their last chance to end this. Mikhailov moved toward the altar, his hand reaching for a stone tablet that lay upon it. The tablet was inscribed with the same runes they had seen throughout the mountain symbols that Dmitri couldn't fully understand. But they were familiar. They were part of the ritual, the key to sealing the power away again. "This is it," Mikhailov said, his voice steady. But there was a hint of something else, something darker. "We can use this to lock it back, but we need to channel the power." Dmitri nodded, his mind weaving. They couldn't afford failure. There was no other option. The energy of the mountain was too strong, too ancient. They had to find a way to control it, to contain it. Mikhailov placed his hands on the tablet, his fingers moving over the symbols, and Dmitri followed suit, his hand trembling as he touched the cold stone. As soon as his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, an overwhelming force that nearly knocked him off his feet. The light from the runes flared, and the air around them crackled with power. The creature's growls grew louder, but Dmitri and Mikhailov didn't stop. They had no choice. With every ounce of strength they had left, they began to channel the energy, focusing it on the stone altar. Dmitri could feel the power flowing through him, the ancient force of the mountain fighting against them, trying to break free. The light around them grew brighter, the energy so intense it felt like the world itself was being torn apart. Dmitri's body screamed with the strain, but he didn't let go. He couldn't. And then, with a deafening roar, the power surged. The creature howled in fury, but it was too late. The light from the altar exploded, filling the chasm with a blinding brilliance. The force of the explosion sent Dmitri flying backward, the world spinning around him as the ground shook violently. The energy from the altar shot upward, the power of the mountain coursing through the air, crackling with intensity. And then, silence. Dmitri lay on the ground, his chest heaving, his body bruised and battered. But he was alive. His ears rang from the explosion, his vision blurred. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his hands shaking as he looked around. The creature was gone. The mountain was still. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Dmitri allowed himself to breathe. December 3rd, 1978. The silence that followed the explosion was more deafening than any roar the creature had ever made. The earth stopped shaking, and the mountain seemed to hold its breath, as if uncertain whether to collapse or to settle back into stillness. Dmitri lay on the jagged ground, his body bruised and battered from the violence of the energy pulse that had erupted from the altar. For a long moment, he could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heartbeat. His vision was blurry, and his ears rang with the reverberations of the explosion. Slowly, cautiously, he pushed himself up, his muscles protesting the movement. His hands were shaking, his body spent from the effort it had taken to channel that energy. But he was still alive. Mikhailov was beside him, standing shakily, but resolutely. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with blood and dirt. But his eyes were clear. There was something in those eyes, now, something that Dmitri hadn't seen before. A kind of acceptance. Mikhailov had always been grim, but this time he seemed to know that what they had done was their final act. "We did it," Dmitri murmured, his voice hoarse from the strain. "It's over." Mikhailov didn't immediately reply. Instead, he looked around, scanning the wreckage of the vault, the chasm that had once been the heart of the mountain. The crackling energy in the air was fading, and the light from the altar had dimmed to nothing more than a faint glow. "I'm not sure," Mikhailov finally said, his voice steady, but heavy with the weight of his own thoughts. "We may have stopped the creature, but I'm not sure what's left behind. The power beneath the earth, it's ancient. We sealed it, but the mountain is still alive. It's a part of the land, part of this world." Dmitri understood the captain's words with painful clarity. They had stopped the immediate threat, the creature, the guardian, the terrifying force that had been unleashed from the depths of the mountain. But the damage had been done. The power that flowed from the heart of the earth couldn't just be locked away again. It had been disturbed, and now it was a part of the world. It would change things forever. "We've bought the world some time," Dmitri said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But at what cost?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered. They had saved what remained of humanity, perhaps. But what about the mountain itself? What about the ancient power that had been disturbed? Could it ever truly be contained? The wind whispered through the chasm as they stood in the aftermath. The once mighty vault, now a shattered ruin. The mountain was still, but in that stillness, there was an unsettling sense of waiting, like the earth was biding its time, waiting for something. Mikhailov looked down at the ground, his face shadowed with something Dmitri couldn't place. "There will be no forgetting this, what we've done and what we've seen." Dmitri nodded in agreement. There was no going back. They had ventured into the heart of the earth and unlocked something that would never be contained again. The world, as they knew it, had changed. The guardians had been mere vessels of the earth's will, and now that will had been released, its full fury unbridled. There was no telling what would happen next. "We've done everything we can," Dmitri said, more to himself than to Mikhailov. "We stopped the creature. We sealed the heart of the mountain." Mikhailov's eyes darkened. But for how long? Dmitri didn't answer. He didn't have the words. The weight of their actions pressed heavily on him, and the uncertainty of the future loomed like a dark cloud. The wind picked up again, howling through the cracks in the stone. But Dmitri couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, something watching, waiting. "I'm sorry," Mikhailov said, his voice quieter now. "I should have told you sooner. What we were dealing with." Dmitri shook his head, his eyes fixed on the dark, empty horizon. "There's nothing to be sorry for. We did what we had to do." Mikhailov didn't reply why, his gaze distant. The mountain had been their enemy, and now the creature they had fought was sealed away. But in its place was something far more uncertain, more terrifying, a world forever changed by their actions. They stood in silence, the weight of the world pressing on their shoulders. There was nothing left to fight, nothing left to save, only the future. December 4th, 1978. The silence was suffocating. The mountain had fallen still, but Dmitri knew it wasn't the end. The eerie calm was only the lull before the storm. Even with the creature sealed away, even with the guardian subdued, the aftermath of their actions lingered in the air like the taste of ashes. Dmitri stood at the edge of the chasm, looking down into the depths where the earth had torn itself apart. The chasm yawned wide, an endless black void that seemed to swallow the light. He felt the pull, the subtle pressure, as if something deep within the mountain still waited. Mikhailov had collapsed to the ground, exhausted, his body broken by the effort of everything they had endured. Dmitri was the stronger of the two now, but it was hard to tell if either of them could ever recover from what they had done. "Do you think we'll ever understand it?" Dmitri asked, his voice quieter than he had intended. He didn't expect an answer. Mikhailov looked up at him, his eyes heavy with the weight of what had transpired. "We weren't meant to understand it. The mountain, the earth, it wasn't ours to control. But we tried. And now we'll live with the consequences." Dmitri sighed and glanced over his shoulder, back at the wreckage. The vault, the ruins of the base, the cracked landscape. It was all a tomb now, a hollow echo of what had been. The giants, the guardians were gone. The true creature, the force that had been locked away, had faded into nothing. But Dmitri didn't know if that was a good thing. "What happens now?" Dmitri asked, though he wasn't sure he really wanted to know. He had already seen what happened when humanity tried to harness forces it didn't understand. "We go on," Mikhailov said slowly, pushing himself up from the ground with a groan. "That's all we can do. The world, the earth, it'll change. But we don't have the luxury of letting it consume us. We survived." Dmitri nodded, though the unease in his chest wouldn't subside. They had survived, yes, but at what cost? The world wasn't the same. The mountains weren't the same. And the creatures that had once guarded it were gone, nothing more than a memory, an echo of a time that could never return. They had done everything they could. But now there was only the aftermath, the remains of their battle. And in some ways that felt worse than any fight they had fought. Mikhailov stood to his feet, his body sore but resolute. He looked around, eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for something he couldn't find. Dmitri could see the exhaustion in his face, the toll that the endless struggle had taken. The weight of the mountain, of the power, had drained him. "Let's get out of here," Mikhailov said, his voice strained but steady. "There's nothing left for us here." Dmitri didn't need to be told twice. He was ready to leave, ready to find something, anything that resembled normalcy. The feeling of dread that had haunted them for so long still clung to him. But maybe, just maybe, they could leave the mountain behind. The nightmares, the giants, the horrors beneath the earth, they were all fading. But they would live on in him, in Mikhailov, in everyone who had survived. Together, they turned and began to walk away, leaving the ruins of the mountain behind them. The journey had ended, but the future was still uncertain. The world had changed. They had changed. And so, they walked.